Welcome to another episode of Summoning Insight here on the Insight on Esports channel. It's a very special day for us because we get to announce our brand new sponsor. That's right, it's Bud Light, brewed with just 4 ingredients: barley, rice, hops, and the refreshing ice-cold tears of professional League of Legends players. Really happy to be able to bring this new sponsor to you guys, along with their core ingredients that we are proud to represent here. You know, Thorin, sometimes it's just really fortunate that something happens right before the show is about to go on, so I can just go ahead and text you. We got this great CLG announcement. You want to save that till we get Amazing on the show, though, because you think he's going to have some stuff to say about it, right?
We can talk about it now, but I'm sure he'll want to give some thoughts on it. It's the sort of thing he's interested in. Obviously, by the way, he was in TSM, so if anything, he's been in teams where there is a lot of pressure, etc., you know?
Yeah, that said, I do think, he'll give his take, but it is incredible to me that we continue to see this level of transparency within esports, because I would have figured by now the combination of Breaking Point, the TSM shows, the famous LA Valiant and Overwatch League, where the in and out conversation with agilities, which, by the way, many of you League of Legends fans may not have seen, but it is probably the single most hilarious conversation. So what happens is, you guys probably know Noah Winston from Immortals, and he takes one of these Overwatch League players, and it starts with the phrase, Noah summoned, like he's some kind of wizard, summoned agilities to in and out. And they're sitting in this car in an in and out parking lot in Los Angeles, and the rain is just hitting the windshield. And he's basically just talking to him about how he might have to bench him from the roster. And it is incredibly awkward. And yet we have this new conversation that comes out via a sponsor for CLG, saying that they want transparency. If you guys didn't see the CLG video, they already deleted it. I'm sure you can find it in many other tweets on the internet. Nothing ever really goes away. But it's basically the GM of CLG coming into the room and saying to his players, this might be the last time all 5 of you play together. They're a bunch of really sad-looking professional gamers. It's incredibly awkward to watch. I think it goes without saying that given CLG's very expensive roster compared to their results, that they were going to be looking for changes anyway. But I want to talk with Amazing about how these situations result in terms of player performance and how it can affect that. But Thorin, I want to know your take from a PR angle on this one, and we can talk about that.
First things I would say first is, I do understand that most of the orgs in esports, I mean, we commented on it, I'm going to say a couple of months back now, when there was that list that the Spellsy, the guy who used to work with me on Gamers, made, where it was all the YouTube channels and how many League of Legends hits all of the orgs had. And so, for example, the most egregious one was Evil Geniuses had some absurdly low amount, even though obviously they are spending fucking millions and millions on their League of Legends team. So I do know that orgs are pretty bad at content, and they're pretty bad at knowing what people would want to see or how to package it. But what I don't get, so essentially I'm going to answer my own question, but I just don't get why this is content. That's what I don't understand to start out with. I don't understand why it's important that anyone outside of the team would ever see this information. I feel like that whole thing of transparency has just become a shit excuse to give people drama that they want. So here's the thing, you don't in any way ever need to give me transparency as to what goes on in essentially what is the literal equivalent of the locker room of your team. I'm actually a strong believer in that old school mentality from sports, that what happens in the locker room stays in the locker room. In my opinion, if I was a coach or a team owner, I would legitimately tell people, you are fined and or fired if you literally reveal secret things your teammates told you, or things that happened in the spur of the moment after a defeat or a win, that's private. That's actually a sacred area. And the reason I bring this up, by the way, is because I've had the same experience myself working as talent. If I'm in the green room, I don't want to be thinking about the idea you might be secretly filming me, or you're going to reveal something that I said later. The whole point of that green room is that's a safe area where I'm explicitly not on camera, and I can actually chill out and sort of let off a bit of steam or communicate in a way privately that remains private. So I would just start there. I don't really get why this is part of the gig of being a player. I sort of do in this sense, right? If your team is literally I'm talking literally, not like this. Literally, TSM, FaZe Clan, Optic. If you're in one of these teams, listen, it comes with the territory. That is part of being on those teams, is having every idiot dickhead fan scrutinize all your moves, getting thrown under the bus by the org, having them like leak exclusive. That is basically, you know that going in, right? That's like joining TMZ. You can't join TMZ and go, do you know they filmed me without my permission, like in a segment when I was in the office? That's, you know the office is filmed. My problem is this. Why are people like CLG doing this? This isn't even your bag. Like, this isn't like the sort of vibe that CLG's gone for. There's been no transparency in CLG, by the way. Fans to this day say stuff like, oh, I wonder what Hotshot thinks. Hotshot hasn't even been involved in that org in about 4 years or something. What the fuck are you talking about? So to me, the real problem with this one was, one, it was related to a sponsor. It's obviously come off really badly in terms of optics. But two, I just don't get what the upside was. Like, what was worth the risk, as it were? Because we could get into a whole separate tangent, by the way, about the idea of, like, you know, high pressure jobs and that, you know, you're going to be fired and so. I don't really get the whole premise of why it exists in the first place. Like, I don't know what, like, I'd love to really know genuinely, because I think it is transparency, Monty. I think they wanted people to tell them, like, oh, very brave job, you know, to show how you actually dealt with the situation, like you professionally told the players. Because if you want to get into the whole side tangent, I also think it's just some pussy shit to even tell people. Like, you know what? If at my job, my only job is play video games in your team. If I'm not good enough, I don't need like a fucking like quill written letter from like the master wizard to come through and then have a whole week to think, oh, I'm just fired, I can't play this week, I'm subbed. It happens. I don't know if people know this, but in like true professional sports, there are stories of coaches where when it gets to the, you know, like in an NBA season, for example, you will actually sign slightly more players than you need in case injuries happen, etc. So what they tend to do is when you're in the run up to the playoffs, I forget when exactly this is, I'm going to say like 2/3 through the season, they'll let like the last couple of people on the team go, basically, and say like you're fired, so basically, because they were already the people at the very end of the bench who never ever played any minutes, so like they weren't even playing the garbage time. When they fire those people, Monty, and this is professional sportsmen, supposedly some of them break down crying. I'm not joking, because in that moment they realise like this season's a write-off, I didn't get onto the team, you know, I tried to work my way in, they obviously don't want me, I'm getting rejected by literally a whole team. Like, if adults are going to do it, what do you think fucking video game players are going to do? Like, it's going to be awkward, isn't it? So to me, I just don't know why the whole thing exists, mate. I don't know what the point of this is.
I do want to say, like, I have a lot to say about the player psychology and like what this can do to a team. I think from like a management or coaching perspective, and also just the other problem is that you don't know any of the conversations surrounding this. So in isolation, the comment looks really bad, but then it gets taken out of context. Could have been part of, you know, they could have been telling the players this for weeks, and this could have been the culmination of this moment. But we'll get into that in a little bit. I think from the PR perspective, what is surprising to me is like you said, from a brand perspective, this doesn't seem on brand for CLG at all. Now, I couldn't tell you, going back to our brand conversation from last week's show, what CLG's brand is, for instance, because they lost all brand identity when Hotshot left the team, because Hotshot was effectively the brand. Or at one time, before they sold to Madison Square Garden, they were kind of like the more, I would say, mature fan base foil to the TSM bros. And that's what attracted a lot of people. They were Double Lifts fans, obviously, as well. So I'm not sure, like this
to say CLG's brand. Here's what it is right now. No joke. Think about the last few years. The brand of CLG is the name. It's the idea of like, I know this shit, but I think it's sort of funny when they upset someone. That's like that is their vibe now, isn't it? Even their own fans are sort of like begrudgingly fans almost.
But they don't have a brand. Like their brand identity has just completely vanished, and it's unfortunate because I think Hotshot was a really good brand ambassador for them. And when they sold the team, he got a bunch of money, but they didn't actually keep him in that capacity, if that makes sense. Like they didn't keep him as like a team mascot or a face or whatever, which I think was a really big mistake for them overall. Maybe he didn't want to do it. I don't know. But I think
there's a whole thing we should probably have an episode about sometime. Maybe it's an Esports Salon episode. One of the things I think is mad or misunderstood in the modern day. You know, we keep making these points on all these shows that like realistically, not many people truly are a fan of a brand. They tend to be a fan of the player, right? Like even every fan who goes, no, it's not true, I'm a fan of TSM. Well, we'll only ever be able to test that if Jensen had actually joined instead of Bjergsen, and Bjergsen had gone and joined a different team like Fnatic, wouldn't we, you daft little cunts? Because then we would have actually had the test then, wouldn't we? Unfortunately, we can't ever have that test. You all get to pretend you're still TSM fans. So I personally do think, by the way, in the vast majority of cases, except for very rare ones, and they even tend to be cheats where the team just keeps winning, most people are fans of the players, not the actual brand. But the reason why I bring this up is because I think the orgs still don't get this, Monty. Like as you're saying here, if you were of CLG, someone who worked in the org, you had to understand that the only person you had left as branding was Hotshot. The rest were all gone. Maybe Aphromoo when he was there for the last couple of years. These are the only people with like a real brand and who actually done anything in your org. Because that's the thing. I see, to me, I know what Fnatic's doing. Here's the best example ever. Fnatic's doing awesome in the game, Monty. Right now, they're literally the number one team in LEC. But I'll tell you what, it doesn't feel like they're a big deal because there's no Rekkles, there's no Caps, there's none of the players that your brain associates with Fnatic. So, like, I think people like Fnatic, they did fuck up in that sense. Like, what they had to understand was this. They literally, by the way, parlayed motherfuckers like Caps into keeping Rekkles in the future. What they had to understand was, on their golden path, they could never afford to lose Rekkles. The second he went, that was most of their, like, identity gone as a brand. Because even if they're the best now, it'll be a different brand. They'll be building a new image, won't they? They won't be really taking anything from the past and connecting it to now. I think most orgs don't get it, mate.
Well, there's not even, I mean, we can make a bigger argument too that there's not even a through line to the Fnatic org because, like, in CS, they're famous for having the Swedish roster, right? And Rekkles is Swedish, so they had that kind of continuity. But, you know, you don't necessarily have that continuity anymore.
You know what's sad? I even did an interview with Khan, it never came out, where I basically asked him that question because I thought they masterminded this dude. I even said to him, there must be a connection that you've, like, sort of kept Rekkles in the org the whole time and you're Swedish, and he was like, no, it's actually just coincidence. I'm like, what? Does no one get this? Does no one knows what's going on in this org right now? You know.
All right. I want to get back to the CLG PR though, because not only, you know, moving beyond the branding thing, to answer some of your questions. I mean, the whole reason this started was because TSM started doing these documentaries back in the day, and TSM had sponsors, and these were sponsored deliverables. And then you had like the chasing the cup. We called it 2 teams 1 cup because it was funny, and it was CLG and TSM. But I remember when we were coaching and they were trying to film at the Korean boot camp, which obviously turned out disastrously back when I was coaching CLG. But I hated that shit because everything that happened behind the scenes was taken out of context by the fans. The players would react super negatively because they would get a flamed on social media or flamed on Reddit or what have you, and they would be like feel like they had to justify themselves because it was part of a much larger conversation and lacked any contextualization about what was going on within the team. And I don't understand why sponsors necessarily want these deliverables. Now, I will say selfishly, I fucking love Breaking Point, dude.
For the shows like this, by the way, it's the shit. Of course, yeah, of course. I've always made a joke, but it's actually true, by the way. When I look back now, here's the sad thing. None of us in esports really do it all just for the clicks and the money. Because if we did, by the way, the number one show people like you, me, Dom, all should do is just a reaction show every week. And all we do is just react to the fucking clip. Like, it's the easiest slam dunk clip of all time. It's just the problem is, most of us actually want to do something like meaningful and something fun at the same time, so we can only have so many of these things get through in it.
We could also carve these shows up into like 10-minute segments and just release them every day, which would be much more annoying. Instead, we just give you a nice like 2-3 hour block for people with actual attention spans in the world. So, you know, it's working out for us. We enjoy making the content this way. But yeah, I think like you look at these shows for us, and they're absolutely incredible because it shows how stupid this industry is in a lot of ways and how many stupid things keep happening. And obviously it's incredibly fun for us to talk about and to discuss. But I think especially as brand tie-ins, like what brand in the history of capitalism has said, I really want transparency in terms of my sponsored content? No, it's about shaping a message, right? No brand ever actually wants true transparency, and that's what you're getting when you put cameras in these rooms sometimes, and that's not good for anybody because you can't really control the message that goes out. So I do find it somewhat shocking that this occurred overall, and that it continues to happen across different teams, because CLG is just the latest in a long line of these kind of public gaffes. And at this point, I thought we would have learned. And also at this point in time, the reason why we had to do this in the early days of esports, the reason why the old TSM shows existed was because fans ate it up at the time, but also it was one of the only ways to get sponsorship value in like 2013, 2014, when esports was still very much on the rise in the West. And so now that we have sponsors like Bud Light involved, there's not really, they're directly involved in the LCS and creating content around the LCS and their own post show and everything like that. There's no actual reason to do this kind of content anymore because the only thing it brings is negative brand association and stupid drama that is great for our talk shows, but I don't think it's particularly good for esports.
I also think, by the way, that Absolutely. There are other LCS teams could have done exactly this and they wouldn't have had the same backlash. And the reason why is entirely logical. CLG hasn't won fucking anything for a million years. They haven't even been relevant. As I said, their whole brand is like they're sort of the joke banana peel for good teams, aren't they? Like they're not actually going to do it themselves. They're the bird, not the engine, in my analogy of the bird strike, right? So my problem is this, right? Basically, even though obviously it was a lot softer than this, what that guy essentially said, this is why I say I don't even understand what the efficacy of it is, Monty. Like, why do you need to tell someone that they could be replaced? If they haven't picked up on that already, they're in trouble. And if they are, and somehow that then, in my opinion, it can only affect you negatively almost. Like, the person's going to be replaced anyway. Why putting that over his head would help him? I don't really know why. Like, again, I feel like they think they're being fair in some way that they're not really. Like, if I'm doing the job this week and you think I can do the job this week, let me do my job this week. Why would you tell me that? But you might be fired next week. Like,
is that going to motivate you?
It's almost like the shit my opponent would say to me before the game starts to fuck with my head.
Exactly.
Why would you ever tell me that? So here's the problem, Monty. Basically, it's sort of like a softer version of that famous, is it like Harvard, you know, at the commencement speech where they go, look to your left, look to your right. Only one of the three of you will be here in 4 years. You know, they give like some epic speech at one of these like Ivy League colleges, right? Because they're trying to give you the vibe of like, you know, not everyone's going to make it through this process. The problem is you can do that if you are an elite institution because you don't care about the feelings of the two guys that leave. You have an unlimited amount of people coming into the funnel and you're saying, no, I'm explicitly trying to be elitist and I'm only going to keep the best. The problem is, CLG, that ain't your vibe. As I say, by the way, if that was TSM, Team Liquid, maybe Cloud9 fans might not fuck with it. People might at least get the vibe of like, oh, you know, it's a tough environment. You got to be on your, you know, you got to be good to stay in that team. They didn't even bill it as that. They just did this weird thing where they told a bunch of people, oh, hey, love you guys. By the way, you could all technically be fired. You might even die tomorrow. Anyway, have a great game. Like, what? What the fuck's the vibe I'm sending here? Like, what is this message? Like, what is it? That's not transparency. That's just garbage. That's just transparently bad. That's all it is. What is this?
I do love that because you can, like you say, imagine if you literally took those words of like all five of you might not be playing together next week and put it in the mouths of like a TSM player, it just becomes fire banter and like that's intimidation tactics.
Dude, that's like the sort of shit like Michael Jordan was just saying to you if you're a supporter, like, yeah, bitch, you might be on the bench next. Like, listen, you're fucking orcs saying that to you. Wow, that help. How would that help anything? Because here's the thing. Yeah, there is obviously the odd weird person who would actually, you know, it might help them, but it's not going to be North American League of Legends playing it. That's going to be some weird fucked up guy from like fucking France or something. It's not going to be some American guy. And also, here's the other thing as well, guys. Like I say, it's all about the room. You've got to read the room. If the room is like Team Liquid, by the way, it would be a great example right now. And you've got players like Alfari, Jensen, Kojic, people making millions of dollars, and they are only there, remember, because of elite performance. Because Team Liquid isn't a team that's about fun and, you know, a good value. It's about being the best. It's about trying to win. It would at least make sense then to do that whole thing of like, if you don't like do it right, you're out. Think how CLG's team is. It's all the fucking but he is a great guy, Monty. Like, oh, what's he like as a player, though? He's an amazing guy. Oh, but what's he like as a mid laner? Oh, he's a really cool guy, though. Like, that's their whole team. It's fucking Wild Turtle, Poor Belter, and a bunch of people that just basically weren't good enough for the better teams. And then you're going to put them together like some sort of mad Dickensian novel where you gathered all these children from the workhouses and going to go, you might not all sleep, make it through the night. Like, oh, bloody hell. Oh, please, sir, can I have some more life? What is this? What concept is this?
It's not, here's the thing. It's not the Dickensian workhouses. That's the funny part, is that we know, well, you know, we know those players are getting paid a lot of money. Like, probably, yeah. CLG is massively underperforming compared to the amount of money that they're spending on this roster. So it's, you know, in some ways it's even more embarrassing. I love the idea too, like you talk about them just being a banana peel, because if you look at their terrible logo, and CLG has just a god-awful logo. If you actually just look at their logo and imagine it yellow, and then with like one of those banana stems at the end, their logo looks like a banana peel right now as well. So it's fitting. Send us your Photoshops of that one, because I think we can get some funny shit. All right. I do want to talk about the player motivation and what this...
I'll even corroborate something you just said there, because again, fans would think these aren't good players. First of all, they're all mega veterans, so for sure these guys are getting paid. But more importantly, if people don't know, CLG, by the way, were one of the teams last year in the offseason that had like super team rumors. Like, they potentially were going to spend lots of money. So I don't think people know. That team has money. It's just bizarrely they've chosen to manage it this way. Yeah, it's not Golden Guardians. That's the stupidest part about all this equation to me.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I do want to talk about how this like affects player motivation and team dynamics, but we should get Amazing in here for that, because he had some very interesting conversations about that in a recent interview he did with InVen Global. So we'll take a little break here, guys, come back and get Amazing's thoughts in just a couple minutes. All right, we're back with our guest this week. See, we only have one guest on weeks where that guest actually watches multiple regions, so we can talk to them more in depth on multiple regions at the same time. So thank you very much, Amazing, for being well-rounded in your approach to League of Legends. And I especially wanted to chat this week
You can
because
talk. By the way, there's a massive quality that I appreciate. The problem is this, right? There's a spectrum. Most people who are pro players can only talk about about this exact champion or this matchup or this match. So you have to keep them in this little set of lines. Then you get people who can talk quite a lot, like Amazing can talk about most things. Then you got the line where it's like, oh, listen, Whipple, we have to get someone else has to get a word in. There's a spectrum to it all, but he's sort of on the healthy end over here. I think.
appreciate
I'm glad I count towards the healthy end. I'm glad. Oh man.
So, by the way, I'm going to bring up some topics to talk about with Amazing a little bit later on about this interview that he did that was very good with Invent Global, because he said some things that about kind of analysis in the game that are super interesting. And actually, we can tie in one of them right now, because as we talk about CLG, one of the topics in your interview was talking about kind of healthy team environments, how you experience that as a player. You specifically called out Reggie and TSM as creating a good team environment. And then also how you then took some of these lessons and applied them to your coaching. And so let's tie this into the CLG point. We usually let me put it this way. I usually try and avoid having potential hot button topics with our guests, and then I allow them to comment on what we just said as they so choose without drawing them too deeply into the debate. I doubt you give a fuck personally. So in terms of team environment, not just the PR angle, but the team environment, what was your take on the stuff that was being said within the kind of CLG prep room at LCS there?
I mean, oh man. Okay. Like in terms of what can like there's usually like 11, like usually it's like 20% is right, 80% is wrong, But in this case scenario, I generally think you could have not said anything that would have been worse than what they basically said at that point in time, right? You're in a team room. Right? You address the whole team as a GM, which is already like a position that is like kind of fluctuated in terms of power over the course of the splits and over the course of the years, obviously. And you basically address them, you sit them all down, somewhat like little children, like in a kindergarten group, and you're like, guys, this may be the last time you're gonna be playing, and this may be the last time you're not gonna be fired. And you just legitimately just sit them down for the camera for that purpose, and put them on the spot to actually like also show emotions at that very moment, right? Like, what kind of message are you sending? Not just towards like the players, but also towards anyone that wants to join CLG.
Exactly, future players.
Yeah, you're like, oh my god, okay, so if I get fired, at least I know there's gonna be a camera there. So this is gonna be my warning. Oh my god, there's a camera. No, not again. So this is what I'm trying to imagine right now, that like future players are so put off by that I think most players just wouldn't want to be in that situation. It shines such a bad light on the day-to-day operations. I think Grabs had a tweet about it, that it was telling how if this is how they operate on camera, how do they work on a day-to-day basis? And that's basically the question we all have to ask ourselves. Like, how do you get to the point that you have to sit your players down, tell them they're going to be potentially fired, and then utilize that as content and think that's a good decision overall? Like at some point, someone in the hierarchy has to have had like a thought of, it's like, are we the baddies? And that never came. It was just uploaded. It was just uploaded anyway. So no one thought they were the baddies.
I want to actually ask you two this, because I'm still genuinely struggling to figure out what like CLG's side of this was. Like, for example, when you're saying like the speech they gave there, I still can't tell, because as far as I can tell, it's one of these two, and I want to get your vote as to which one it is. Either they think like, this is why it doesn't make sense at CLG, because this isn't like a CLG vibe, but it's either that they're doing like the sort of like drill sergeant thing of like, look, like unless you all buck your ideas up, any of you could be out here next week, so you've got to sort of get wins. Basically, it's like trying to be like, this is Man United, like we already win, or you get the fuck out. You try and do like a hard approach. Or the other one, and this is the one that I part of me feels it could be this, or they really think they're doing these favors they're doing these players a favor, like emotionally, by like sort of not springing it on them that they could be fired, instead being like, look, we give you like a week's notice, like like it could be next week, like, so which do you think it is of those two? Because I go between the two when I keep thinking about it, because neither of them make sense to me. What would you lean on?
I mean, it's a clear number 2 for me.
Okay.
I don't think that CLG has. I mean, and I think you said it earlier, right? Has the draw nor the capabilities of actually like demanding that kind of quality from the players and being like, hey guys, if you don't play better, we have to bench most of you. It's rather the second that's why I had the kindergarten reference to a certain extent, that it feels like that they did them a favor, but basically kind of like telling them already in preparation. But it's such a twisted view, because it's basically telling people they're going to be executed very soon, potentially, but without any kind of chance of ramification, like of like remedying this. Yeah, redemption, right? There's like you're potentially going to die, but like we can't do anything about it.
And what I hate about this kind of communication too, not saying that the org can't say this. I don't think that saying it really helps anything. But you also don't know that, like, clearly the org itself, to play devil's advocate for a bit, is frustrated with the performance based on the money. Like, objectively, this roster of veteran players should not be performing this badly. Like, pound for pound, they should be at least a mid-table team in the LCS. They don't have bad players.
Agreed.
Like, to be clear.
Agreed.
So, but here's why going back to the PR and context thing, we can't know if the players have been causing problems or drama, and this is the last straw for the management. And so what could be happening is that the management looks like bad guys in this situation, because we don't know what has gone on this entire year. There could have been tons of bullshit to get up to this point in time. But this is the reason why you don't release these videos, because it just makes one person, in this case the management of CLG, look bad, and we don't actually get any real insight. Like, for all we know, we could totally agree with this approach if there was the right set of circumstances surrounding it, but because we can't know, and this is the information they choose to put out there, we have to judge everything on this one moment, and this one moment in isolation, in a vacuum, looks fucking bad.
It does. It is up to them to create that context, right? Like, I mean, as I said it, if you continuously create the situation where you have like uploads every single week, like we had back in the days with TSM CLG, like we had these uploads every week where you could kind of see the line, for example, with Chaos back in the days, where you kind of saw it coming. You knew he was going to be benched to a certain extent. Like, you at least have that context, kind of know that his actions kind of drove that decision making. But in this case, like, this is the first time they've uploaded anything of that quality and that seriousness in quite a while, that you have no idea where to put it. And I mean, I think no matter what though, it kind of puts a really weird, I mean, it just puts doubts in my mind about the decision making. It doesn't even need to be the management being the bad guys or the players potentially being the bad guys, either or. It doesn't really matter. It's more about the decision making that led to them like uploading this out of context, that they're so unaware of the situation and the potential ramifications that they accept them, or they don't even think about them.
There's obviously a lot of stuff, by the way, we could segue into. Like, for example, Monty, one of the things I know from talking to him on past shows that Amazing didn't like about his own career was the period where, funnily enough, the same player who was in that video, Broxer, when Broxer was brought into Fnatic, they basically just straight up told Amazing, like, you're going to be here to sort of train him to do your job, and then one day he'll just replace you. Are you cool with that? And unsurprisingly, Amazing was like, not really cool with that, actually. I'm trying to be a pro player myself here. Why the fuck could I train this guy? So basically, it's one of the reasons why Amazing sort of had to, like, gradually exit the team and end up eventually with Schalke later on in Thieves. So I this is a bit of a loaded question, because I sort of know where you lie on this, Amazing. But what I want to know was this: taking away the on-camera element of it, right? Because this is sort of in the same wheelhouse. What do you actually think, though, about the premise of sort of telling people either, watch out, you could be benched, or you will be benched if you don't perform? Because like I said, I was pretty cards on the table about it before. I would prefer, personally, like, everyone sort of knows that's the implication for any player in theory. I know in theory the certain players can't be benched, but almost anyone, if they play badly enough, eventually, or if you cause enough problems, will be benched. So everyone sort of knows it. I just don't personally know if it's that good. I've never been a player, though, for someone to directly tell you. Like, if you were a player, for example, would you rather they told you in advance and you felt like you got warning? Would you rather they don't tell you at all? Would, in your case, like they did with the Broxer one, does it actually just fuck with you more if you know that someone's going in with the whole thing where they're not sure who they're using, etc.? What would you say to that?
I mean, I think a pre-warning, but a private pre-warning, not actual private one, one that isn't on camera, like is the best thing you can do. But it depends on the player type, right? Like, for me, for example, I'm going to be honest, I like when people are confrontational with me, because to me it shows a decent amount of respect that you're telling me, hey, straight up, this is what I think is the current issue. I want you to improve in that direction. Otherwise, we have to find a different solution for the issue, right? For me, this is positive. It gives me like a clear line. Okay, this is what I have to improve on. Whereas for others, this is actually an added pressure that they feel on the back, and they suddenly are going to be. They're already under pressure. They're already underperforming. You kind of feel this too, that you're not really performing to the standard that like you're used to, that the team is used to, and then you have that added pressure of being told, hey, you're going to be fired potentially if you don't play to a certain extent, to that extent, right? So it definitely depends on the player type. I would, however, say that it's never a good solution to just surprise people with a firing. No matter what, this is the most unacceptable one, because first off, you didn't have to respect the term beforehand, and you then legitimately put him in front of the guillotine and legitimately just execute them right on the spot without telling them any kind of context why, what they could have improved on within that time. And that is rather a result out of bad management or bad coaching, because the coach or management should have known what kind of direction they want to put forward and orientate themselves towards to in order for the team to improve. And if they can't do that, then it's on them.
Well, we don't know if that was done or not, right? Because
Yeah.
that's the whole thing. Is like, I guess, I appreciate your perspective, amazing, but like, in if you want to professionalize the scene and you want to treat it like traditional sports, of course the coaches should be there and the management should be there, giving regular performance updates to the players, making sure that they know. But at the end of the day, like, I don't think, from my perspective, going to a player and saying you must improve on these things or we're going to bench you is the wrong way of going about that process. I would say, you need, this is what we need to work on with you, and if it doesn't improve, what I would do is just roll up and be like, we're bringing the academy player in for this week. Like, it's a performance-based system. You don't have to give people notice, right? They should have a clear set of parameters on which they need to improve. But I think the way to do this, what's so wacky about this approach to me, is saying like, this might be the last time all 5 of us play together. But I would be in and I'd be like, guys, today was it was a disappointing week. We're going to be rolling with these academy players next week. This is our starting roster.
Yeah.
For LCS. This is our starting roster for academy. Let's go. Done.
No,
Great.
I think that's a clean approach. It's telling people, like, I mean, but then you observed what happened before that, right? Like, I mean, we don't know about CLG in this case scenario, but that's like, it shows a management like with foresight. I think regular performance basic updates are necessary. I think they're good. To me, I think it depends on what kind of team structure and team culture you want to establish, right? For example, in TSM, and many people, I mean, I talked about this at some point, but I didn't really expand on it. There was a period between week three and week 4 where I had to sit down with Reggie and Loco, and they were basically telling me, hey, if you don't improve, we're gonna have to look for a different player, because we don't like the way you're approaching certain things. To me, at that point, it was positive and made me realize, hey, they actually care about my performance and they actually want me to be part of the team. That's why they're telling me these things. That's how I felt about it. Whether it was true or not is a different question, but that's how I felt about the situation. So I thought it was positive to kind of go with that approach instead of just like giving a nudge into a certain situation, being like, hey, you should we're going to try to improve you on this. And if it doesn't work, then we're going to have to roll with academic players. So for me, it's rather like, hey, clear cut, that's what it is. So
to go back, like, when you talk about the kind of environment that you had on TSM, because I think in your interview you were very clear that you thought that the environment was set up well, and then later helped you transition into coaching. What were the things? Is this the kind of stuff you're talking about, where they were very straightforward, respectful, honest with you about your performance and what was coming in the future? Or were there other aspects of TSM's team environment that you really liked and applied later on?
I mean, I think the first premise was that like we had a winning culture, right? I mean, it was like set into motion by Reggie, obviously, like having this prior experience and knowing this is what we want and this is what he wants. So everyone kind of had that initial buy-in and knew what TSM was about, because TSM at the time obviously was also a big brand, probably potentially bigger by comparison to other teams than now. So everyone knew what it meant to be on TSM. You saw the shows, you saw everything. So everyone had that initial buy-in, so that already helped. Then furthermore, you had the hard work, honestly, of Loco and Reggie, that they kind of showed that they're gonna work as hard, if not harder, than each one of the players. So this Michael Jordan approach of, hey, I'm not gonna ask you to do anything that I'm not gonna do. And both Reggie and Loco, I mean, Loco at times, I mean, he knows too, but it is something different. But like both of them had this hard work and effort for quite some time. They're working harder at Worlds even than the players were. I mean, Reggie was up for like 18 hours a day or something like that, and he watched VODs 24/7. So, I mean, I guess 18/7, but whatever it is, he was really just there all the time. So we always had a presence in the room that kind of like helped us facilitate like the team. Like we kind of always had a direction. He was always there to kind of give us some assistance, and he was just always present. And I think that kind of leadership from the coaching staff isn't necessary if you want to drive a team from the top down and you don't want the players to basically be left to their own devices. Then I think that's the right approach, and I think that's what TSM, to me at least, did. Then beyond that, obviously, we had other things like team activities. Like we went out almost every Saturday to eat together, found new restaurants, did some exercises in the morning too. And then in Korea, obviously, had the insane amount of like travelers that unite you in a different way than anything else could do. Because you have the common struggle, you want to win Worlds or you want to do well at Worlds, and you're going through it together.
By the way, when you actually joined TSM, was obviously after they'd already had the whole like TSM Game Cribs thing come out. Like when you joined, was that even in the back of your mind when you joined the team that like obviously like I could be the guy who looks bad in one of these videos? Was there anything you even thought about?
No, I never thought about it. Like actually, no, it didn't come up in my mind because I didn't think about it as important. It was just something that's going to be passively there and it's going to observe me sometimes. But we had really clear cut things that like we had to do in terms of sponsorships and videos and everything like that. And I think Lina as well as Reggie, they were pretty lenient in terms of like if players, for example, needed more time off and they didn't want to do a video, whatever it is, then they were also given the time off. So it wasn't as enforced despite the sponsors being really important to them.
Was it weird being filmed though? Like if you were having one of these like team discussions and you know the guy just filming that massive car, can you block it out of your mind?
I mean, at the time it was kind of weird because you kind of had to act for the camera. You kind of had to be someone else that you were not in order to look good to the fans, especially. Sure. So it did affect me a bit, but given the fact it was never in meetings that were really important, it really didn't matter as much. Like it was just entertainment for the fans, and we knew as much.
Amazing actually said no to the Ward costume that Reggie wanted to make him wear, though, for TSM Legends. Hey. He turned that one right down.
He actually told me not to play Nunu anymore because he thought it was too slow. So he actually really saved me from that one. Yeah.
Oh, there's a fire Halloween costume idea for you, Maurice. You should literally just like get some cardboard and make yourself a Ward costume and put a TSM logo on it, and that shit will go viral. I promise you, it'll be really funny. There you go. It's pretty fun for you. All right, let's talk about something else. And since you watch the major Western regions, amazing, and we have this smorgasbord of games that you can pick from, all the ways from the sugary, terrible for you LCS to the broccoli of LEC. Which team or games most excited you or interested you or you thought were garbage this last week that are just delicious all the same that you want to talk about?
Oh, what was interesting? I mean, any EG game, to be fair, because EG, despite them being in NA isolation, is the only team that actually knows how to force properly on the bottom dives. So they kind of like bring back a lot of the old school style of like second waves bottom, diving with mid lane prior, making those plays happen. And honestly, they also are the only team that's actually efficiently playing 1-3-1. So we saw this in terms of how they overloaded on side with, for example, Lucian. But in general, they know how to play the game in a very distinct manner that no other team right now, at least in NA, knows how to play. But in terms of bad games, I would say.
No. Let's start with EG.
Oh, we can start with the good one. We can start with the good ones. Yeah, start with EG then.
I think EG is a really interesting team because, especially with Danny coming in as a rookie player, and I think what I haven't heard talked about at least is that the way that EG is playing, it seems like the meta is tilting into their favor because always, like you're saying, they were kind of a split push team. But the problem is that people would say, oh yeah, Jizuke tries these crazy plays or he does like mechanics tests, which smacks a lot of the time of like LPL mid laners, right? And you kind of were left wondering, okay, well, if LPL teams can kind of get away with this behavior from a mid lane, why is it that EG can't actually execute last year? And indeed, like, they had such a problem with this that they ended up benching him. And then because they wanted to use their import slots differently, right, which caused other problems. And when you see Deftly kind of leaving the roster and now we have Danny on there, what I think is underappreciated about Danny, and you wouldn't expect this, especially from a team that has Ignar on it as well, because Ignar is very famous for being a roaming support. But if you look at the stats from EG, now remember that this team's like on an 8-game win streak right now. Danny is, a recent addition to this roster. Danny plays a lot more like tactical than any other AD carry within the league, and he and Ignar have kind of bad lane stats. Like they're often down in gold and experience at 15 minutes. All the gold's getting funneled into the EG solo laners for the most part. And the thing that's working for EG right now is they apply pressure super well with Danny. Like, the Cloud9 game that they played was a really good example of Danny really wasn't even participating in a lot of those fights on Tristana. What he was doing is farming like plate and tower gold, getting 2,000 ahead with like 1 assist. But why Jizuke can get away with these kind of crazy plays is that even if he dies, as long as EG is also applying pressure somewhere else, they continue to get advantages because his crazy plays draw pressure, and then Danny can just kill a turret, right? Or Impact can just kill a turret. So I think the big difference for EG is that they have finally found a way of playing the game that can activate Jizuke's strengths. Because if Jizuke pulls it off, then they have huge advantages. And if he loses, they are still finding ways to develop advantages, right? Like 4v5. And that's what's impressive to me.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with that. Like when I watch their games, what they seem to understand is really how to create those fights like efficiently and really not lose much out of it. So even if they were in a situation where when they were creating those fights, we're still in the enemy half most often, especially when it comes to the like 1-3-1 situations when they suddenly shifted a bit or had someone overload, they still created those fights in the enemy half. So even if they lost those fights, enemy was not able to get anything out of it. And it's so simple. Yet so many teams forget about this, that like if you die on pressure, it's not nearly half as bad as dying.
No, it doesn't really matter.
And that's it doesn't really matter because like people can't push the waves in fast enough. And worst case, you lose one objective, which is maybe a dragon or a Herald. Obviously, around Nash timers, it's a bit different, but what is so confusing to me is that every single year, and it also applies to me obviously because I'm not omnipotent or omniscient either, is that so much knowledge gets lost. And it's so simple that like applying these kind of strategies or applying these kind of like baseline rules that you have put up like in past seasons, you suddenly forget them in a season and you reset again back to 0. And that's what I saw with EG, at least in the beginning of the year, where they had no idea of what to do with the players and they had. But then now they're kind of playing the CG style, almost that I guess Empire had back in the days when he was coaching Huni and everything like that. So it's a really similar style. It hasn't really changed. It's just in a different meta with different players, but it still works.
Thing is, though, that's one of the reasons I actually now enjoy watching LCS, because not only were all the other teams doing those benchings, which basically were like some of their best players being benched, which ruined the hype of like TSM versus C9 versus TM, all the matchups you want to see. But the other one was, for most of the year, EG was so underwhelming. And yet you looked at the roster on paper, you were like, this is fire. Like this lineup should literally be contending for the title. Like, look at the players you've got. So then you look now, there's the difference. Is, all the episodes, I've had a million talk show episodes where I bring people on who've been like European players or coaches, and they go to America, and it's like, why does no one ever just properly side lane? And they always basically half of them either just like are politely try to go, I don't know why, but the real reason they all say is just like, the people who aren't the one can't not fight, so the 3 people just fight into 4 or 5 people and die, and then you just think, why did I bother doing that? Just group together, and then there's 5v5, whatever. Like, basically, that's like the sad part. So what this tells me is 2 things that are really good news. One, Peter Dunn has actually taught a group of players to 1-3-1, but here's the bad news. He's only got 1 fucking American in the whole team. The rest are all European imports or Korean. So he's picked the right team to do it with. I will give him credit. He's picked the easiest one to start with. And then secondly, and this is the best news of all if you're a fan of the players in this team. Last year, I used to hate EG because I was like, does this coach not know who Jizuke is? Like, this doesn't even make sense. Like, why is he playing Azir and then going, you failed at Azir there, so I'm going to have to bench you? That's like that fucking Einstein quote about if you like judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it's going to seem fucking shit. I mean, obviously he didn't say fucking shit, did he? But you get the point. Like, you have to judge them based on what they're actually good at. So to me, it's like the idea, like, listen, if it's even vaguely possible to 1-3-1 and you have Jizuke, you are almost necessitated to 1-3-1, or why are you playing Jizuke? It's his whole career. He's probably one of the best ever at it from Europe as well. So to me, EG finally makes sense. I'm even loving that they got Svenskeren back in. I told Monty, I think last week, that all those fucking tears shed over contracts in his beautiful career would quickly be forgotten when they just started winning and replaced him completely. And now he can just go and fuck off again, and we can all enjoy Svenskeren, can't we? So cool. Thanks, contract. You played your role, mate. Back down to fucking academy you go.
All right. I think actually Contracts is like a worthy of an LCS starting spot. I actually think he's a pretty good player.
In which team?
Almost, I would say most of them actually.
No way.
Yeah. Who would I replace?
What is the EG Academy team?
Oh, then let's get some names. Let's get some. Yeah, what teams would you put him in right now? Starting spot.
That's a good.
I mean, I would put him in Quest, Golden Guardians, Liquid, because they don't have Santorin right now. Dignitas.
You think Contracts was better than the Jose Diodor?
Mayo works differently to Contracts. I think Contracts has a really unique style, and I think Peter or someone talked about it. I don't know, one of the coaches has talked about it, that he's like he's someone that always looks for kind of like the immediate outplay, but also like he has a really oppressive jungle style in a way that he's going to try to a certain extent like a blabber light. I feel.
Yeah, he's always making plays, by the way. He's always making plays, yeah, for sure. No, that's what, because my joke back when he was on Golden Guardians, when they had the Froggen lineup, which was only going to team fight, and late, it was like, oh God, Contract is making plays again. Like, let's see if we can all sit through the next 20 minutes. Because the joke is, yeah, if you don't want him to make plays, it's going to be a nightmare. If you do, by the way, he's a high activity jungler, of course, yeah.
Yeah, he needs. I mean, so he would fit on any lineup that kind of lacks that initiative right now. I mean, definitely the bottom tier ones. I think Iconic as well as Hostedeo at this point, I guess, or the replacement NXI. They're obviously individually weaker than Contracts. I think they're also individually weaker potentially than Anda, and Anda's also on an academy team. So it's like there's definitely a value in potentially having Contracts on a roster in the LCS, but you need to utilize him properly. And I think that's the hard part, and that's been the hard part about having him throughout the years, because he's not on the same level as someone like Ameo or Santorin in terms of understanding the map, but he's really good at like analyzing his matchup playing towards it.
By the way, back on the topic though, like the 1-3-1 part, the reason why it always killed me for so many years, teams could never run it. It's because if you have like an elite European player, then it's the way to, it's literally the way to. It's like in basketball, right? If you had Michael Jordan, would you choose to never let him go one-on-one? You wouldn't, would you? Because that would be the most ineffective way to play your offense. But that's what these teams have been doing for years. Like, the idea that some of these other players couldn't do it. Like, I can't believe all those years they had, like, Jensen and they just team fought all day long. The guy was, like, one of the best 1v1 players in the whole league, and you never, ever attempted to use that. Because I notice people do this about Jizuke. They go, oh, but he gets caught. First of all, nobody's perfect. Nobody goes on the sideline and never gets caught. In fact, sometimes, as you two were basically discussing, it doesn't even matter if you do. At that point, when they're coming towards you, you don't just back off from it. You go, fuck it. If I die, I die. Just keep doing the pressure elsewhere on the map, don't you? Like, fans don't know how to interpret it as well. I think that's part of why people don't do it as well.
I mean, it does matter if you die in the split push if the rest of your team isn't doing the right thing. And I think that's like the big misconception is you look at fans will look at Jizuke in isolation. I think the big change really is Danny. And here's the big issue. Who are their 80 carries before? Like fucking Deftly and Bang. These guys play really conservative laning styles, and they don't really they're not aggressive in terms of the way they apply pressure or their willingness to take skirmishes, okay? And you have to be an 80 carry that is willing to engage and play aggressively in small skirmishes if you are going to play on a split push team. Period. Because you have to apply that pressure, and you have to all in if you see them committing resources to the other side of the map. Now, I don't think, I think Deftly is awful, okay? I think Deftly is the guy who plays like a coward, gets into a team fight, messes up his mechanics in a team fight, and then just dies. So I think Danny's a massive improvement, but I think stylistically, this is what they were missing. And, otherwise, if you're gonna play with a guy like Bang or Deftly, you want to play for those team fights. In which case, Jizuke is the wrong player for your roster, right? This was a style issue that they had, in my opinion.
No, I mean, I think Deftly is decent. I think it's serviceable, but I agree with the overall sentiment. That's like what an A has done over the years is that they have had archetypes for every single role that they kind of adhere to throughout the years. So for top laner, for example, it has to be someone that's like a tank player, a solid player that's going to play for team fights. Mid laner has to be Orianna, like the Bjergsen type, basically, the archetype that he presented. And AD carry has to be someone that team fights too. So it's also every single archetype was kind of guided towards this team fighting mantra. And it seemed like that even if they brought in talents from all over the world that had different strengths and different abilities, they still tried to kind of create them or mold them into that kind of archetype again. And I think that's been the biggest issue for NA over the years, to actually utilize talent, which is like, I guess, the talent suppression machine that we have over there to a certain extent.
You know, it's funny you talk about that too, because if anything, I feel like the Australian AD carries that have come in have a very different mentality than like the classic NA AD carry archetype that you're saying. Like, they're much scrappier, they're much more aggressive than most of the AD carries that come out of NA.
I mean, it has changed over the years. I think recently, over the last 2 years, especially, I guess that thinking has kind of changed. I would say that, I mean, if we think about like, I guess this season brought a big change. I think in terms of support mantra. I think bringing in someone like, or Ignite arriving kind of brought a change to the support mantra. Then obviously all the 8K changes. Like, it's like at some point it became overwhelming, I suppose, for the region to actually cope or handle or fit them back into the archetype. So I think that was kind of necessary for them to evolve into a different direction where NA has become more diversified because of it.
All right, so EG on the 8-game win streak, and the other narrative that I think we can put to bed right now is people who are like, oh, Jizuke is a coin flip player. Well, you don't like flip heads 8 times in a row accidentally, guys. Like, yes, they're best of ones, but EG is clearly on a strong level in terms of their team identity, their core team identity right now, as well as their macro play, like you're pointing out. So I think this team really probably going to continue to roll for a little bit unless people can figure out bans that will relieve some of that pressure. But I think it's really challenging to be able to do that.
By the way, there's a term that was driven into the fucking ground like everything else in esports: coin flip player. Because what they started doing, Monty, was this: they take terrible, objectively terrible players that, in the analogy of the coin flip the wrong one every time. And just because they flip all the time, Monty, they go, it's a coin flip player. It's like, the logic of the coin flip is that he's going for like 50-50s, for fuck's sake. It's a coin. Like, in this scenario, that's like going for a coin with 1 million sides and you don't land it more. Yeah, there's no relevance to the coin flip part, because on the other side, I agree on the Jizuka one, right? At his worst, Jizuka is a coin flip player. Like, if you put the wrong team around him, yeah, he'll just int on. But if you put him in a very good team, it's why the whole like caps ints all the time thing was oversold. It's like they're inting because they're playing a very high risk, high reward style. The idea is if Jizuka is the guy where early in the game, if he sees the game, he just goes for it. He doesn't think, oh, is this like the right ward? Well, is this laning fist? Am I trying to play it out? So he just goes for it. But the point is, he's very good. Like, when they make it, they almost say it like as a derogatory thing. To me, it's just a plain style description. You know, if you do it right, as long as you don't misapply the term.
The thing is, like, with these styles, the only issue is, I mean, I agree that it's been oversold, and certain players have been like having that moniker for too long for no reason. I mean, I think with Jizuka, it's slightly different because I don't think he's quite the mechanical player that, for example, someone like Caps is. So, like, he is more akin to a coin flip player than, for example, Caps is, because Caps makes more. Sure. He can just bail himself out more often than not. But it's like, as soon as you understand the decision making and you kind of analyze it, because it's so different to a lot of players, you need to get ahead of the decision making. If you don't do that, you're always going to be surprised what he's going to do, because you don't quite understand the skill check that is happening. So you need to understand this decision making on a higher level, and then you can actually counterplay it. But that is like the difference between the standard archetype of player that a lot of people want, that is like the standard, like, I'm just going to play for teamfights player, and someone that is a bit more explosive, right? He's going to make you make choices. And if you don't make the wrong choice at that point, well, then you're fucked and you're done and you're dead. Or you're chunked and you have to go back home and recall or whatever it is, and then go back to lane afterwards. So that's basically the pressure that Jizuka puts on you, and that other players also put on you that are coin flip players.
And so many of these coin flip players are just not plug and play players, right? They're often players, when they look bad, that have the wrong teammates or the wrong style around them. Coin flip players are the players that demand the game be shaped around them. And it's totally fine to have these players as long as you're doing that. If you're going to try and put these players into a roster that makes no fucking sense with their style, you're just going to have a bad time, because I'm going to tell you right now, Jizuke is not going to change. Like, These kind of players don't change in any esport in history. It's very rare for them to suddenly wake up one day and say, you know what, that thing that I was doing that I have honed all of my skills on, this very specific playstyle, well, that's out the window. And all of a sudden I'm just going to be a super conservative control mage player right now. Like, they're not those people. So you just have to realize that when you're actually doing your GMing, which it seems like EG is starting to pick up on, especially with like Peter Dunn joining the roster now and making these moves, bringing in Danny, I think was the right fit for this roster. And I think that's the result, right? They came back with Jizuke again this year after having benched him. Now, part of that was probably that they couldn't get a player to replace him. I'm just going to say that. I don't think that was entirely intentional, but given the roster that they've had, they've done a good job of forming their team around him now.
Also, just bad coaching and GMing, like you say, because at the end of the day, if you were like, well, I'd really rather Jizuke, rather you just played Oriana and played Sim. Mate, the shelves are full of those. Literally, they're giving 50% off on those coupons. You can't. Every player in the world who just plays mid lane Oriana, you daft fuck. Why don't you take the super unique player you've got and build a team that works around him? Right. The worst thing about it is, by the way, Monty, it's not like there's no fucking track record. This guy's been in a whole bunch of LEC semi-finals. He's been at Worlds. Like, it's not like there's no track record. It's not like this is a rookie we're taking and going, but could it even work like they do with Leader now? Like, he's done it for years in one of the best leagues in the world. So to me, it was. That's why I didn't get the roster last year. That's why I was saying when I said last year, I don't think the coach even knew who his player was. He genuinely was going, I think Golden Glue would be better for my team. It's like, well, you fucked up massively with the team you built, mate. Like, that's the end solution.
That's why it was so frustrating, because like the decision was like, we'd rather have Golden Glue and Bang. And I'm like, this isn't a choice. This is not a choice you're making. You're basically just condemning yourself to be mediocre when more work, it would take more work, but you could be good, right? And they decided to be mediocre. And that's what was frustrating about that entire sequence of events.
Anytime you put Golden Glue in as a starting player in LCS, that's like when a woman fucking breaks up with someone and they have the ice cream and just cry. They know the ice cream's not adding anything positive to the equation. It's just comfort food. But they're just going, you know what? This whole night's a fucking write-off. And that's what you're doing with your split. You're just going, you know what? Fuck it. Put Golden Glue in there. I'm out. And you go on a yacht somewhere. And I see him wearing an Astralis jersey, and they know all about quitting on a team part with the split. There you go. You like that?
No, but it's understanding what the player type is you're signing, right? Like, for example, if you have someone, even if you have someone like Golden Glue, like, I mean, I think he's serviceable, or he was serviceable for quite some time.
He's all right.
Obviously, he's all right, but it's like, you know what you're gonna get when you sign him, right? You have him be a stable for similar to Pobelta, like they're really similar in terms of that regard, and you know what you're gonna get. Like, but if you have someone like Jizuke, or you have someone like, I mean, what is it? Another good example.
Because a jungler, maybe.
Yeah, maybe Hylissang, someone like that. Like, you know what you're gonna get, right? You know what you're gonna get. You know that you have to enable this play, and you have to understand, hey, what does he think about the game, and how does he think about the game? So when you analyze that, and you kind of get behind him, you kind of see the game through his lens. Because conflict players to see the game differently. They see, they don't see it like the archetype of like, oh, I'm gonna go for objective XYZ and then reset next objective. But they always look for the small chances that they could create and the small leads they can create. So it's just like really understanding the plan, really interacting with him, and not seeing him as some kind of burden after you hire him, which is the worst thing anyway.
Oh no, mate, that's even a good shout. This is like getting Hylissang in your team and going, oh, great news, right? I want you to play Janna and Nami only and never ever leave the lane under any circumstances. Because you're a support player, so your job is just help the AD carry get CS. Like, what would the point in having Hylissang be then? Like, you've taken all his skill set and just chucked it in the bin. Like, you can't even use it at that point in time. Because that's the thing I find sad about League of Legends in general. Maybe like 5 years ago, the meta was pretty constricted and it was hard to get wins outside of that. It's true. That's why I think Koreans were the best. But especially the last, let's say, 3 or 4 years, man, the amount of scope for imagination in League is really crazy now. Like, you should see, like, look at all the teams in different regions as one. Like, I think of all the times ever, now's the era when you can go, forget the meta, what players have I got? What can I do out of that mix? Like, I think now's the prime time to make use of all these individual characteristics and not like force people into these stereotypes. You know.
Yeah, it's like we approach singularity, and at this point, like, the meta evolves faster than we can. So we basically have so many things that are evolving in different leagues. So we have to keep track of everything, but that's impossible at some point. So you have to go your own way and kind of analyze, hey, this is our strength, so that's what we're gonna go for.
Yeah, I would argue that the game has gotten to a point of complexity too, where it's basically impossible to, for a variety of reasons, it's basically impossible to play a perfect game of League of Legends anymore. Part of the reason is, as we've touched on many times in this show, the changes to vision. So you're always playing with incomplete information these days. Part of it is the acceleration of the game state. Part of it is the fact that the Drake souls the Dragon Soul is so important in the game. So it requires, like, basically, there's this constant focal point that creates chaos in the game because you're kind of forced to fight in a way that you were never forced to fight previously at points in time. And also, it's how many champions are there now? Over 160? It's not possible to be good at every champion in the game anymore at your position, right? It was never possible at any point in time, really, to be good at every champion in the game. Yeah. But now, even in an individual position, it's not possible to be good at every single champion. Therefore, you must pick styles in a way that you didn't have to previously. But that's the powerful way to play the game. It's also a fun way to talk about the narrative of players and teams.
I agree.
You could even say, by the way, Monty, if you want to extend it further, that even beyond individual players, like as a team, you have to pick a coherent style, because otherwise all you're going to do in the draft is just leave one guy on an island 24/7. He's just going to be the guy getting blamed because you don't pick or ban a certain thing, or you can't ever play it. So, yeah, as a team, you have to do that even.
Yeah, and one more along the pick and ban point. One more point I wanted to make about EG's style is that what's interesting about their usage of Danny, and you wouldn't anticipate this as a rookie, is they kind of leave him high and dry a lot at the time because he gets blind picked a lot, way more than most AD carries in the draft overall, because you can really tell that they're trying to put their resources into their solo lanes on this team. Okay. And that's been like a key part of EG's style that I think people haven't really discussed significantly. Like if you actually look at his counter pick rate, he's like he's second lowest with tactical or third lowest with tactical and wild turtle, which makes sense if you think about how those teams play. He's a weak side AD carry player, but he's a weak side player with an aggressive style, which I find interesting.
Anyway. What team we talking about now?
Yes, exactly. So
we keep picking from the smorgasbord. What's next?
The smorgasbord is here. It's great. Want to talk about how Cloud9 is shit? We could talk about how Alphar is back. God. We could talk about all the upsets. What is FlyQuest doing? Licorice seems to be good again magically. Talk about any of these.
Okay, let's stick with an A and let's talk about. Actually, I guess we can talk about C9 and one of these. I think both of them are interesting because they kind of are going a similar route in terms of just like not being that good anymore, I guess, or kind of like. Getting slowly worse. I think the decline of C9 is a bit steeper than for one of these, but and they probably have to. Let's actually start with C9. I think C9. What has really surprised me is how little they seem to want to play the game, and this is maybe just my observation. But when I see them play every single early game, there's no active plan being made. They don't know what they want to play around. They don't play around anything. Perks and blah blah seem so disconnected. And then they somehow like edge out a couple of wins come mid or late game because they're just like by default better players. But I'm so confused as to how bad they look after they got obviously the championship and then they went to MSI, had that extra experience, and then they come back and they potentially on a bad day they're legitimately the worst team in NA. On a good day, they're still pretty much up there. So I think that's just interesting to talk about.
So let's talk about like how C9 was successful previously, because I think you have to look at the pre-perks C9 and go back to like spring of last year. And what they did so much of the time was to play through their bot lane. And a lot of it was like making sure that Sven could carry the game. And if we compare that to, let's say, the EG game that was played this week, I agree that they look lost in the early game. And you see the same problems that have plagued them from last year continue to occur. And it's just unacceptable at this point in time. So, for example, regarding a lack of plan in an early game, so they have Jace top lane with Fudge, and they have Lucian in the mid lane with Perks, and they have Blabber on Diana, okay? It's Ezreal in the bot lane who has an early tier start. So they cannot path, like there's no skirmishing potential in the bot lane. So we do see, they're on blue side, we see Blabber pathing bot to top in the jungle. And then this is kind of the encapsulation. This fight that happened in the river, I feel like, is really the encapsulation of all of C9's current issues. They don't understand which fights they can actually take. Like, you're playing with a Lucian and a Jace, with a Diana, you're not going to be all-inning this Renekton Viego with hard CC. You need to poke them. Also, give up the fucking crab. You have to poke them in order to fight. You can't all in on the crab. You will lose. You will get hit by a Viego stun. You will get hit by a Renekton stun, and you will just die. You need time to build up the damage in order to win that fight. So you need to walk away. But this is the exact same problem. And when we talked to FlyQuest on this show, they said, we looked at games that C9 had played in summer and noticed that Blabber was being overly aggressive in the early game in the river, no matter what the composition was. FlyQuest intentionally baited them into these fights in the river and then knocked them out of the playoffs and knocked them out of World's contention. And the shit is still happening. It's still happening.
Yeah, it's been masked for quite some time. Like, and when they're good, they kind of mask the fact. Like, I mean, that's a bad conflict we can kind of talk about. I think Blabber is someone that, on his own, is to my estimation still the best jungler in NA. Like when he's actually playing to his full potential, but his play right now is so off-putting because I feel like no one in the team besides him thinks the way that he does about the game, which is basically like try to aggress for every crap, try to make plays around every crap, and make sure that something is happening because he thinks he's the better player and he can skill check the other person.
You have to draft around that. That's the problem. Is you can't draft these compositions with Tyr, Ezreal, Lucian, and Jace, and then try and all in at 3 minutes in the game. You can't do that.
Yeah, it's one. It's just for me, it's just confusing. Like I see them draft TF one game, then Lucian the other game, but they kind of play every single champion the same way instead of actually like addressing that in the moment, and that is laziness to me to a certain extent. And I don't want to like insult it too much, whatever, but I think that's laziness because when you see, for example, a Shizuka play this matchup Lucian into Azir, for example, when he played it, he was in enemy turret at minute 2 or 3. He was basically behind the minion, zoning Azir from XP, keep chunking him. At some point, that Azir was out of the game, and then obviously Viego died on turret, but that's a different story. But when I see Perks right now playing, for example, he doesn't quite do the same kind of amount of aggression, and that's necessary in these matchups. When you play Lucian versus X, when you play Jace versus X on the top side of the map, it's the same thing. So you have to actually kind of like take bad traits, or like not bad traits, but like not ideal traits in order to swing the game in your favor, because at that point the enemy cannot react anymore, and then that's basically like a crap for you. And I think that's what I don't see with C9 anymore, that they don't preemptively prepare certain objectives on the map, whether that's a crab, whether that's a tower, or whether that's a dragon, that they don't have that foresight anymore, and they rather just react in the moment. And I don't know if it's a lack of pre-planning, but something has to change for them to actually be able to routinely create like these plays again, because that's what is necessary if you want to win the playoffs, if you want to win potentially like a couple of games afterwards, because every other team has these routines down. We see this with GG now. We saw this partially with one of these over the course of Sunfield until now, that they had these routines down. That's what you have to have, and C9 right now is far from it. I do think that Sven is still playing really well, and I think that whole benching in the beginning obviously didn't make sense, but their bot lane still seems to like play towards their win condition individually and still seems to do fine. But I think Perks, Blabber, really have to figure things out and have to direct one another. Like one of them has to take a step back and just say, okay, let's just do what do you think?
Well, I think they're just struggling with the identity, because it was clear last spring. It was like, Blabber's the MVP. He's going to win these fights. You know, he's going to carry the team playing the Olaf or whatever, right? And then Sven is there to receive the resources, and Sven is good at carrying with resources. He's a very solid veteran player. And for people who are saying Blabber's bad, Blabber's not a bad player. It's like Jizuke. You just have to play. Blabber's not going to play a non-Blabber style. That's just not going to happen.
Blabber actually should play on a team with fucking Jizuke. If you've ever seen the way that those players played in Europe, like, there we go, just ganking at level 3. That's what we do every single game. You're going to love it, Blabber. Sign up. Get in this time machine with me, loser. We're going back to Vitality from season 9. Let's go. He'd love it, mate. That'd be the dream team for them. They just both go balls deep on every play, of course.
So the thing about it, and it's not a lack of champion pool issue from Perks or from Fudge as well, and perhaps part of the coaching turnover, like the reign over to Mithy head coaching swap, the fact that, they didn't have their full coaching staff at MSI, these are things that could be affecting it. Because I don't think any of these players are bad individually. I think they just don't know how to play the game together, and I don't think that the coaching staff is doing a great job of drafting in a way that will allow their skills to complement each other.
Yeah, what exactly? That's like the synergy in draft 2, obviously, but it's also that I feel like that each one of them plays towards their own advantage very much. And I guess we just talked about it in terms of lack of synergy, but it seems to be that there's an overfocus, to me at least from the outside perspective, on like playing the game objectively in the right way. Like individually, I'm gonna do the right thing. But like that's basically what I said earlier. Like sometimes you have to slightly play the wrong way for yourself, that is not ideal for yourself in order to get leads, because then you put yourself in odd situations, right? Like the enemy is, for example, like 100 HP lower than you are. Like you're gonna have to base a bit earlier because you're gonna have to get the ability to push out at some point. But in that very moment, you have the advantage. But that's like what you have to play for in certain situations, and I think that's really something that like a lot of veteran players lose over the years, and that makes them look washed up, because that's kind of what we're talking about Perks here, for example. When people say he's washed up or he's not playing as well, whatever it is, it's because of that it's like he doesn't put himself in these coin flip odd situations anymore.
Yeah, he plays pretty passively.
Also, it's not even like, here's the thing, as you say, we're not telling him you have to like just play it and grow 24/7. You don't have to be an idiot. But like, I agree. If you look at this entire split, are you ever going to bully anyone ever in the lane? Like, are you just going to wait every game? Like, it's like he's bought into the movie version of what his own career is. Like, oh no, wait, he's not supposed to. He's supposed to just play smart, and then like in the mid game, he makes like the genius shot call, and then they come back and win the game. Like, look, that's like a general trend of your career, but like, there has to be some. Surely you're getting a good matchup every now and then, mate. You can just shit on the other guy. You don't have to wait till that point in the game. It's not like your signature move. It's not like wrestling where you're not allowed to just pin the guy 1 minute in. You have to like leg drop him, and then you have to do the people's cheer, and then you have to fucking what? You don't have to actually do it every time, Bugs. It's a fucking just league, isn't it?
Here's the thing: it didn't start that way when he joined the roster. Like, remember him like shitting on Demonte with LeBlanc.
Yeah.
Like, we saw that at the start. So I don't know what's happening now, where the killer instinct seems to have just vanished from him entirely. And what's interesting about C9 rather is that they're still pretty good in the late game. Like, they still will fight you to the bitter end, and that's one of their great strengths.
Oh, they don't give up. Yeah, exactly. That's still good.
Don't. Yeah, they're still a very dangerous team within the context of the LCS. It's just that the complaints happen because with the players on this roster, they should, and with this coaching staff, because everybody says, oh yeah, look at this coaching staff.
Yes.
We've got all these positional coaches. We've got Vagar V2, we've got Max Waldo, we've got Reignover, Mithy, look, ex-pro players everywhere, right? The disciples of LS, they've all unified into one team, and yet we're not actually getting a good integration of Perks within this meta, which is confusing.
Yeah,
and to be fair, they didn't have a lot of time after MSI for a massive meta shift. And there have been conversations like Young Buck was saying publicly, like maybe like the team that goes to MSI should have an additional week off. Because I know from talking to C9 and their players that they were scrimming like 3 days before the split started on a completely different patch because of MSI, because they took a week off, which was, I think, well deserved. So I think probably got in the failure. I don't really think
in the sense that they won this spring. Obviously, they don't deserve a week off for being shit at MSI. Just in case anyone misunderstands that part.
Yeah, and also like I think they got into their own heads because I actually think they were less shit at MSI than it appears to be the general opinion.
Yes, it was overblown.
They were okay at MSI. They lost some stupid games, but they also won against some really good teams. So I kind of averaged out there in the end. And also, like, just from my conversations with the player too, I think even they were really down on their performance, which I was surprised about. I think they could have just shrugged it off.
Before I forget, we should actually have done this in the intro, Monty. I forgot, how are we going to talk all this shit on orgs and branding and not bring up that fucking glorious Team Liquid Alphari video? You know the one I'm referring to, the Jersey Mike's one?
That's actually great.
That was fucking fire. Because I'll even admit fully right now, if you're from Team Liquid, like if you actually are Steve Arnset or like Fix Nation, you had me in the first half for real on this one.
It was great.
I genuinely was sat there, like when I watched that bloody LST1 video thinking, this is depressing. They're going to make him like go back and everything and say it was all, I thought it was real. And then they just did that thing where he was like, I'd just like to say I would never eat Chipotle. I was like, it was chef's kiss. This is fire. This is whoever made this is legit.
And this is here's the secret.
It was the shit.
All you idiot orgs, you always lean into the memes.
Yes.
You do not try and disavow the memes. If the memes are being made, this is what G2 and Carlos figured out a long time ago. You just become the meme because they can't use the weapon that you're wielding yourself.
Yes. yes. It's so important.
Exactly. Yeah.
So rolling with the joke. And not only that, what a fucking great sponsor shout out too.
Oh, it was great.
It made me want to eat a Jersey Mike sub, legit. So I agree. It is fair. We have to shout that one out.
The only one thing I will say is this: they missed one line, which would have made it perfect. Which is all you do is once you finish eating it, you have Alfari go. That's the one sub I fuck with, Steve, or something like that. That's the one line. The one line I needed just to complete it. But listen, it was really well done. It was very well done. I thought that was perfect fucking PR, basically. Because it even took, if you think of this is the genius at Monty. It took an actual PR nightmare that's really bad for your org and actually spun it to be fun again. Like it took all the sting out of it, didn't it? I thought it was great.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally agree. I thought it was excellently done. So shout out to Team Liquid for that one for sure. Not shout out to Team Liquid for the following things, however. Continuing to play Jenkins this week. You won, but why? And second off, putting Alfari back in and then forcing him to play against Golden Guardians in a Mundo matchup with Armeo on Sejuani, which, speaking about styles, let's just say I wouldn't bring my star player in and on his second game force him to play with a Sejuani jungle as a Mundo. Maybe I wouldn't do that one.
That doesn't seem like the right idea. I agree. There are better ideas. No, it's like, but I'm still trying to figure out. I mean, this is not even tier specific. Like how these. So what makes all of these coaches and general managers in the moment decide for one person or the other, when one person is clearly overall a better player? Like obviously we don't see this if we don't see the scrims and everything like that, so it's a bit hard to judge, right? But even if Alfari would int every single one of my scrims, I would still put my money on him over another player, like in 9 out of 10 cases. So what is the decision making behind it? What makes them then be like, hey, Jenkins, we're going to give you more time? After you already leaned into the memes too, you're like, oh my God, we're having Jersey Mikes. Hey, you're not a sub anymore. We instead have other subs can eat.
The narratives are just so ridiculous because Thor and I have been talking like, okay, Alfari might be the best Western Gangplank player, and then you sub in Jenkins and force him to play Gangplank, right? Okay, so Alfari comes back. First game, here comes Gangplank. He's swinging his big pirate dick around, mushroom stamping Fake God. And then the next game, you sub him out, and then you bring him back in and play Mundo. Stop. Yeah. Stop doing that.
I do think there is a legit abstract point we can get into, which is if I had to speculate, Amazing, this is what I think it is genuinely. First of all, there is a thing in esports that already everyone does that I can't handle, mate. And it's terrible in League of Legends because it's a game with a global meta concept, which is where you already have to pretend all 5 players in your team are equally good and at everything in the game, right? I already can't handle how offensive that premise is, but let's accept it for a second. So already you play with this ridiculous scenario where, like we're saying about Jizuki, we actually have to sit around and pretend like if Aphelios was the most OP shit ever, that you would just destroy every comp in EG to just make Aphelios the best player in the AD carry role. You wouldn't. You'd ask yourself, who's my AD carry? What type of team do I have? Do we even run a normal human would do it. Sadly, coaches still all have to pretend like my players can do anything, like as though it was their actual children in the fucking world. Then secondly, there's the whole thing where they do this thing where it's like they can't admit what Monty just said because it sort of destroys the premise of having having subs. Because realistically, spoiler for everyone in the LCS, here's what a sub is. It's someone who plays just if the player you signed can't play. It's not like sports, an active position on a bench, which comes in for certain game time and to do different offensive and defensive strategies. That isn't what it is in League of Legends at all. It maybe was that in Korea briefly when they've done it, and then that's a byproduct of an entirely different culture. In America, realistically, it's the emergency. It's what you do when someone can't play. But they try to use it amazing, as though it was like an equally, it's just a different type of tool. Like, yeah, I could use, who should I use this game? Should I use Alfari? I could use Jenkins. It's like, no, that discussion has never ever happened ever in the history of the entire Team Liquid organization. What happens is maybe you're having a problem with Alfari, maybe here's how, then you go, well, is there anything we can do? Oh, technically, do we even have to use Alfari? Maybe if we use a Jenkins guy. Because my problem is this. In my opinion, all subs are temporary solutions. Realistically, if it's for behavioural reasons, you just want to give the player who's the problem, who isn't the sub, time away from the team to reflect, have conversations with him. Hopefully the fact he doesn't play, guilts him a little bit. He thinks to what he's doing. So in which case, it had fuck all to do with the sub. But my problem is this. It's that it's always presented, always, as this coach who's getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars actually does think Jenkins is better than Alfari. In which case I go, you know what? I don't need to hear any more. Go ahead, sir. Go ahead. Put your whole fucking career on Jenkins. Bring them all in. Get them all in. Get fucking contracts in.
And Jenkins. This nice news for your career.
It's limited. I know. Like at that point in time, like you just look silly as well. I know it's PR, but you look silly when you imply that's true. Because as Monty says, surely they all on some level know that the ideal scenario is to Alfari and that the Jenkins guy isn't as good. Like we've got to accept those initial facts. Surely. Come on.
I mean, obviously, like Cole being new in that position may actually impact that too. He kind of has to probably have other people make the decisions for now. Like I just don't believe him to be. I mean, from the outside perspective, I don't think he's going to be for now at least a full-fledged head coach as other people would be, like Jatt was. But it's still as you put it, right? Like it's that whole sentiment of not understanding. Each player has his own strength, and each player is different to a certain extent. And if you don't acknowledge that ever, and if you play on the premise that you think everyone is or you pretend that everyone is gonna be perfect or good enough at certain things, well then, tough luck. You're far away from reality and don't quite understand that lack of perfection, which actually is actually an acceptance of a lack of perfection, is actually so necessary in order to navigate a team environment.
Sure.
Like if you don't understand that a team is not perfect, or a player or each one of your players is not perfect, well then you're gonna be in La La Land 24/7. And you're gonna play champions you cannot play, lose games you're not supposed to lose because you're not admitting who you are. And It's a wild thing to see. I mean, some teams have figured it out more than others, but those who haven't figured it out yet, are still are the ones like CLG that are ending up in that situation where they have to specialize at some point, because then they suddenly realize that we're not good at anything. We just have to play a couple of broken comps and hope for the best.
But this way, if anyone's also got overlap interest in the CSGO, this is literally what's going on in Counter-Strike right now, where the number 2 team in the world is a team from CIS region called Natus Fincer Navi, and they have the best player in the game right now, Simple, and he's literally basically what Faker was in League of Legends Season 3. He just hard carries every game, he stomps everyone, but the reason this team doesn't actually win all the competitions is because basically the coach of their team has a perfectionist's mindset, and he genuinely tries to play the most high-level Counter-Strike possible. But the problem is, even though he has one player who could do that, all the rest of his team's incompetent to do that. He has 2 players that are basically rookies and haven't played at the highest level before. He has 1 player who never was supposed to be a leader but who got made to be the leader. The whole team is sort of if instead he sat down and what someone said to him was, listen, the next game is the only game you will ever play and it is for your life. How would you have these players play it, right? You'd do a very, very pragmatic approach there. You'd be super cynical, wouldn't you? Like you can do this, this is the best player, give everything his role. Instead of doing that, it's what I'm talking about. They try to pretend as though, cause in theory, this would be the best way you could play. I'm going to have you all do this, but as I'm pointing out, they don't have the pieces to actually do it. And I think a lot of people run into that problem in coaching in League of Legends. I see a lot of coaches where I can tell you, I've taken these guys aside and talked to them privately. They definitely know the game. They're super smart people. Yep. The problem is when they get to do the actual running the team part, some of them really will take what is the equivalent of the chess pawn piece and go, I'm going to pretend this is a knight. And it's you can't do any of those moves, mate. No, I'm going to make my whole strategy that's what a lot of people are doing, sadly.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Well, this goes with this goes back to your interview, and we can. This is a great time to talk about this right now. Amazing is because in the interview you did with InVen, you talked about how a lot of analysis ignores the human element of the game, which I agree with, and I think that didn't used to be the case, but I think increasingly that the human element is being ignored in terms of analysis, not only that the public hears, but also, as Thorin's saying, in terms of the way that teams are operated and coached as well. Do you want to expand on this point?
So when I think about how we honestly conclude or like go forward with our analysis at this point in time, is that we basically assume a perfectionist mindset in more cases than not. We assume that this XYZ is a perfect situation that we're always going to be able to create and replicate, and that's what we're going to strive towards, and anyone that diverges from it is doing the wrong thing. But what people don't understand, that's like what comes out of just being on a team, and haven't been on so many teams over the years, is that any team comes in with its inherent weaknesses and inherent strength. Each player has that innately. Like, it doesn't matter who it is, even the best player in the West still has his own issues on certain champions that he cannot execute. So what you do over the course of the season is that you keep trying to, like, obviously approach that like perfectionist mindset to a certain extent, kind of try to get to the perfect play. But on the way there, you keep having to band-aid certain things, and keep having to admit, hey, this we cannot quite get there. So we have to take like basically that out of the plan. We have to take that out of the plan. We have to take that out of the plan. At some point, you end up with a ship that is basically band-aided all over the place, right? So that's because you only have a finite amount of time to actually fix a lot of things. And the meta shifts keep kind of like breaking old habits and bringing new habits. You're perpetually stuck in a situation where you keep bringing new band-aids onto the ship. And at some point, like, you're obviously going to have a pretty broken ship, but that's what you're going to end up with at the end of the year. We've seen this in other sports too. Like, we see this in the NBA. We see this in football. Like, sure, you can try to play a perfectionist, like, or have a perfectionist mindset. But if you don't admit that your players only have a finite amount of time, you only have a finite amount of time to work with them, you're going to end up with like a ship that may be half built, but it doesn't fucking float, because you did never build the ship fully and just like fix a couple of holes, but you instead built half a ship because you didn't like fulfill the requirements over the course of the season of addressing all the players individually to a good amount. And I think that's basically the issue with analysis nowadays. We see this in draft analysis. Hey, this player is not playing XYZ champion in XYZ matchup. He should do this. Is the best matchup. But how likely is it that someone is going to practice a champion that is working 1 out of 100 times in a specific matchup and is then going to be able to perform? Like, it's, I mean, actually get mad just thinking about this because it's so fucking ridiculous. Like, look, over the course of my career, what I've always done is like, I've seen, okay, for example, at Worlds 2015, I was like, every player blind picks Elise, and my team needs more draft space. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play Gragas, gonna perfectionize that matchup, be as good as possible as Gragas into Elise, even though it is a terrible matchup or like not as good as other matchups are. But I'm at least gonna give my team a draft space, like space in draft. All right, that works. Like, it's an imperfect solution to a pretty important problem, right? But that's something you have to do, and you have to do as a player. You can't just be like, oh, if for example, he's gonna play Jarvan blind for one time out of 10 games, even though it's completely not viable, then I'm gonna have that counter pick ready. It's just not feasible. And I think that's a thing that we keep advocating for, and it's ridiculous to me. And obviously, like, there's this looming, like, obviously, like, almost like friction in the air that obviously I'm talking about someone in particular, like that it is LS to a certain extent, and you know, like, I'm gonna be willing to address him at some point, but it's like it's this underlying mindset that is kind of invading esports too, that people keep trying to like create this perfect approach to an imperfect scene.
I think the issue fundamentally here goes back to the fact that people watch esports, generally speaking, for different reasons than they watch traditional sports. So if I'm a traditional sports fan, the odds that I am not currently playing that traditional sport are pretty high, right? Of any sport, you would say the vast majority of the audience is not actively participating in that sport. which means that I'm not watching the sport because I want to improve myself at the game. I'm watching because I want to hear the human narratives. I want to think about the styles of these players or these teams. That's what the kind of thing that I'm interested in as a viewer, right? In esports, so much of the time, what ends up happening is people are almost always, to varying degrees, depending on the game, but in League of Legends, where the burden of knowledge of League of Legends is immense, like, you probably don't have many people in League of Legends who are watching professional play who are not currently playing the game. And as such, they're actively watching the game to get better, to improve. And that's where a lot of this analysis comes in. But that analysis is not in the service of the esport narrative.
Yeah.
It's in the service of improving your viewer to understand how they can themselves be better at the game. Right? And these are two very, very different goals. One is to improve somebody's play as kind of a coach who is talking about matchups and talking about this analysis. And the other one is as an entertainment product, as an analyst, where you're analyzing how this, like for your example, this player is in an imperfect matchup, but they happen to be very good at playing this losing matchup, and it's going to enable this team's or this player's style down the road. That's the discussion that kind of is going away, because it's two different audiences for two different purposes. And I don't think that there's an issue with either of these audiences, but I think as somebody who watches esports in the same way that I watch traditional sports, to think about it within the context of the players and the teams, it does seem oftentimes bad to kind of eliminate that or minimize that in favor of saying, well, this isn't ideal, this is the ideal scenario, which, even though it's true a lot of the time, doesn't really give the necessary color. And then what happens is fans then treat these players like idiots or end up, and like, we can't hold fan behavior accountable because they're always going to be crazy morons. So, that's not exactly fair. But you have to keep in mind that they're products for two different kinds of viewers.
There's also the problem as well, Monty, and this is a massive issue. I'll give you the exact example of someone like LS. People like LS and Dom, by the way, you can ask them on a show and they'll tell you straight up, they don't actually really enjoy watching LCS. Like, they think, obviously they love like LPL, LCK, they love the highest level of League of Legends, but they'll tell you, for obvious cynical business reasons, they do cover the LCS, right? It's obviously the one that still gets a lot of views. It's a touchstone league for a lot of people. So I will agree, one of the flaws that we have is that the absolute best content creators, me and Monty are doing it right now, are only making the content around LCS because it's popular. We're not doing it because we actually enjoy the product. So the problem with that is, it does mean, like, I agree, by the way, it is kind of ridiculous. Imagine if I turned on the PCS stream, right, amazing, and every second comment was like, of course, this team fight is shit compared to the LPL. I'd be like, I'm not watching the LPL, like, I'm watching PCS, like, why are we framing it this way? But the problem is, that's essentially what we've done with, like, LCS, because LCS's level is so low now. I mean, it's not even as good as LEC, but it's a million miles from LPL, etc. Because it's so low, it means that, unfortunately, the people we bring in to be the best content creators, who are the best, their whole frame of reference is constantly the better leagues, unfortunately. So I do feel as though, like, I sort of get why it ruins the vibe of it. Because, like, I can't lie, I wouldn't watch it if I had to watch it just to enjoy it. So I think we're in a bad spot in that sense. I don't know what the solution is, though. I think everyone's just in stock,
It's also that I think that the narrative, the kind of perfect game narrative, and, I've known LS for 8 years, you know what I mean? Since basically I moved to Korea, and he's always been playing the perfect game in his mind. And I find that very interesting, right? Like, I really enjoy that about him. But the problem to me is that narrative is now dominant, as opposed to taking into account, like you're talking about, the specifics around the team. But he doesn't really have an interest in team or player styles. His primary interest is the perfect game of League of Legends. And that's fine. You just have to know that that's what it is.
No, but I mean, to give historic reference, like, for me, like, when I obviously came into TSM, then obviously brought things into Origin, like, me and Mithy were the ones that were always trying to create the perfect game scenario for our teams. It's like, it was our thinking, make it as Korean as possible, because Koreans were dominant at the time, right? And that works if you have the players that can kind of convert, like, that can kind of convert that knowledge into action, right? That's basically the necessity for it. Like, are there a lot of players nowadays that have the same kind of caliber, for example, that my Origin team had at the time? Well, individually, in terms of game knowledge, in terms of the brains, by comparison, no. I would say a lot of teams don't have that kind of like innate ability to actually translate whatever they're being told into action. They cannot convert it. So what you end up doing is basically you criticize people that potentially, I mean, you can talk about the hiring process. That may be a thing. You can talk about that, but you cannot just address people in a way that you're like, oh, this guy is bad because he's not thinking of that yet. You know, like you cannot. And that's the whole issue that I see with it, because it ignores so many factors that happen before. And I always like to talk about the process. We're talking about obviously hiring process to begin with. You have an individual player being brought in for a specific reason. Then you have the execution of that player. Hey, is this player actually being utilized properly within the team context? Is this player being like given enough resources? Is this player given enough time, ample time by the coaches, by the management, whatever, to actually address all of his issues? And how does the team overall function, right? So there are so many factors that kind of lead into imperfect decision making, because you cannot address everything at the same time. And that's like the whole issue I see behind it. And addressing that with a perfectionist mindset is disingenuous to the process. And I think that's where my biggest issue lies with it, because I know that like I've had to do so many cutbacks throughout my career, and I've seen so many other players having make so many cutbacks to their own self in order to benefit the team, that this is taken out of the view. And I guess it undermines a lot of people, it undermines a lot of players, and it undermines the actual essence of what the game is about. And at the end of it, it's a competition, right? You want to win, you're going to give your team the best chance to win. Sometimes doing the perfect thing is not the best thing to do for your team.
Yes.
And I think that's I guess the essence of the issue that I see with this with analyzing everything and every team through this perfectionist mindset. That you ignore that whole thing.
I actually think, though, by the way, that ties back into what I was saying. Like, what's funny is, in some ways, though, this is what's very good about what LS is doing. It is breaking. Everyone who realizes what you realize, and now amazing, is starting to finally realize why they have to get rid of the idea that there is a perfect global meta that can be transported into any region and any group of players. Because I'll go one further. I actually think personally, Monty, from following esports for many, many years, because most people's playing style is literally a fucking sort of like, it's an extension of who their character is and who they were in their life, in how they choose to interact with the game and how they express their ability. I also don't personally think, like in a game like League of Legends, I don't even think there are like, I'm a player and I have all these champions. Like, you have a playing style. What champions fit the playing style? That's my question. Because I see players that, like, I'll give you a great example. We talked about him already. Hylissang is a perfect player where the wrong coach could make this guy, no joke, look like the worst support in LEC, and he would be fired. The wrong coach, because Hylissang doesn't play certain champions. He does. He'll lock them in, but he will play that champion. Everyone saw this like 2 years ago. He will play Nautilus like it's fucking Pike. He will do that. He will try to engage in engages that are like, what? Where's the escape, mate? Like, how are you going to get out of this? Like, your teammate doesn't even want to go for this fight. So in that scenario, like, if you're thinking perfectly, if you give him those tools, that exact comp, he's going to do the wrong thing with it. It's like, one thing I do like that LS brought to the game was because he's not looking at the humans. One thing he is trying to identify, and this was so misunderstood, it's actually something Monty kind of, I would say, popularized, is the idea of what are our win conditions in this game? Because his premise is this is what the comp is supposed to do. They're not doing it in the game. Like, for example, if they've got like a game that has a scaling comp, why are they doing this early game fight when they don't have like early game chat? You know, that's correct. I like that approach. Like, I'm glad that some of these things exist in the game now, because I got really sick of people talking like everyone was a perfect computer who could play this champion the same way. You know, a lot of people did that.
Yeah,
I can go.
And I think it's also the fact, and what's I think underrated about LS is that his content has bridged non-esports fans with esports. And I think this is why I think esports people tend to chafe against LS, is because we simply just have different goals. And what he does is he provides through patch note analysis, like the content that he creates, people who LS fans, probably a lot of them don't really watch esports besides what they watch for LS, because again, their primary motive is improvement. And you have to remember where he came from. He came from streaming coaching sessions. He wasn't doing esports VOD reviews.
Yeah, true.
You know, even when he was a caster, his main focus has always been on the fundamentals of the game and not about the narratives of players and teams. That's just not what he does. And what he does is he provides a bridge from fans that are trying to improve into esports. And I don't think that there's probably hugely significant crossover, because if you prefer the esports style narratives, you're probably not watching LS's stream.
Yeah. You have like an antidote to this, by the way, Amazing. Like, is there an approach you'd rather people took on, like stream, for example, when it's actually like the LCS or the LEC? Is there like a way to offset what you're talking about, to take into account the human component more?
I mean, what we had in the past was obviously the narratives being driven by the teams, so basically creating that esports content, like having those video cameras basically all around the teams, and to kind of like really humanize the players. And I think partially that has gone missing, and thus the content creators that are now relatively dominant have taken a hold, because there's no competitive like basically material out there that can in any way compete with the views, right? So you have that out, like if, for example, LS or Dom would have been streaming at the time, for example, to that extent that like the TSM content came out in season 3, like you would have like these narratives clashing. We had this with you guys. Remember when you had your summoning insight at the time, and we had our esports content, and it was like we could kind of like interact with that, so that helped. But now it's like, and I think the only way to do it is basically like to incentivize more players to actually go out there and kind of like talk about what's happening, like talk about themselves, talk about the teams, to kind of like give perspective and like addressing the public intent more. Like
I mean,
keep going, man.
Yeah.
Just finish the point and then Monty will go. Yeah.
It's basically it's just like, if you don't address certain things, you're gonna let others write the narrative. That's just how it is, and that's on you. That's on you. I mean, it's not been on me because I've been really fucking open about everything that I do.
Right.
But other people don't do that, and I think that's where they like. I don't want to say I don't want to dramatize it either. But them not putting any content out there, them not saying anything about anything that's going on with their teams, not contextualizing anything, makes it so that every single player that a narrative is being written about is being left out in the open. And that's on the bigger veterans. That's especially on the bigger veterans if they don't defend their fucking rookies, for example.
Well, it's also, I think, a broader issue with the rise of co-streaming, right? And I've mentioned this. While co-streaming is wonderful because it offers different perspectives from different people, it allows people to choose the way in which they want to watch the game. One of the big downsides is a loss of narrative control. And I think narrative is very important to broadcasts, because that's what keeps fans coming back, is understanding the storylines going in. And if you have 10 different storylines from every co-streamer, then it makes it very difficult to follow kind of the main plot points of the season as it's developing. It's the reason why Drive to Survive has made Formula One much more popular, because it distills all of those narratives into like a season-long show that is very compelling to watch. And, a lot of people don't like it because they feel like it misrepresents Formula One, but it's a fucking good show on its own. And it does make it compelling. And I think, interestingly, so Travis Gafford did, I don't know if you guys watched this, did an interview with the LEC commissioner recently. And you had to read between the lines in terms of what he was saying.
That's a Travis interview. Yeah, we get it.
Yeah, okay. Keep going. I thought it was very tactfully phrased. I will offer my paraphrasing of it right now, so you guys can go watch it and form your own opinion. My opinion was, so the LEC commissioner was talking to Travis and said, "We are fortunate that we haven't been in a viewership position where we felt we needed to have co-streaming," because they're discussing co-streaming, which, by the way, is code for our viewership is going up, not like LCS, to just read between those lines. And also, he talked about this losing narrative control over the product. And he said that they don't want to do that, which I totally understand. Because, by the way, live viewing is still possible, so it's not like the fans can't get that content.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, what LS and Dom do anyway. So it's not like you can't get that content if you want. It's just slightly harder to get. But it's true. And one of the things that's so wonderful about the last few years of LEC is they have done an amazingly good job of telling the stories of those players. And you have to remember, and Amazing, you can talk about this, but we're now in, the upside down. We're in the parallel universe. It used to be LCS has all the personalities, maybe not the gameplay, but the stories are cool. The rivalries are cool. Oh, EU LCS, so fucking boring. The players are so dry. Now it's like, we don't have any big personality stars in the LCS, and LEC is like driving all these like crazy narratives. Here comes all these players like doing commentary at the start of the game. The casters, the talent are doing the monologues to like set the stage of a match. They're doing a super good job of promoting narratives around the match of the week. They are fucking nailing it. Like, it's really, really good. They've made it easy to follow because of the way they structure the broadcast, because they decide on the story points that they're going to hit on, and it makes it fun to watch, right?
I completely agree. Like, let's compare, for example, compare the GG line, Golden Guardians line with what we know about Astralis. Like, I mean, Astralis, they have Zanzara. This guy has been on camera. Like, literally, like, he even have memes associated with him right now.
Oh, it's
like,
good personality for sure, yeah.
What do I know about Iconic? I know nothing. Who is, like, this guy could be a robot for all I know, or could be a cat. I don't know. Like, I legitimately have no personal connection towards, like, with him. So, and that is I guess the difference now, that like the over focus and the over exaggeration of professionalism has actually innately dehumanized the players themselves. Other people are capitalizing on it to a certain extent, and are kind of like having the same, like, acting in the same kind of vein, because like none of the players are given a narrative. None of the players are writing their own narrative, and then there's no assistance from the SCS until now, when they've actually started to release a couple of videos every week where they're like talking to individual players in a group setting and kind of talking about the history. But that's what you need. That's what you need to do. Like, we need this, like, in the scene more, and it also would really allow players to kind of like really talk about how teams function generally, because I think that's the most misunderstood aspect of like what the average viewer knows and what the pro player knows, especially if they have been in the scene for a long time, right? Like, I've been in the scene for now, like, since 2012. It's been quite some time. Like, I usually know how these things work out. I know the rhythms. I know how certain players will act. I know how certain people will act, and I know how it generally goes. So for me, it's like I don't see esports, and I don't see League of Legends like as something that is like, let's say, too technical anymore. I see it more as a human game, because I know how these players will act, and then it's whether about like relating to them on a personal level, like finding things that they're good at, finding things they're bad at, and kind of managing in between, right? That's how I have seen my position for like the last 2 to 3 years, I guess, of my career, and that's something that we don't hear ever like being talked about. And there's so many players who are good at.
Here's the problem. Amazing. This is the core issue. This is the core issue with the co-streaming conundrum, is this. Doing what you are saying is putting, as somebody who is on camera, is putting the focus of a broadcast not on you. It's developing an exterior narrative that someone else can replace you and pick up and run with, right? If I set myself up as the entertainment product, or as the product of information instead of the players, I make millions of dollars from making content. And I'm my own brand. There is a fundamental conflict of interest, because at the current point in time, it is vastly more profitable to be a co-streamer than it is to be a caster and support the narratives of the league. Period.
Yeah. No,
so that's what people are doing. And it makes total sense. It makes total sense that would happen. And it's not anybody's fault, but like, this is a really, really fucking big problem in esports, is that the things that make the esport have longevity are not the things that are profitable for the individual right now.
I'll throw something in there. I've got a tangent for you on this one as well, which is another problem, in my opinion, is this, right? It's not a problem for me, but I know a lot of people, when they watch like the official broadcast, etc. One of the things that I've always said this, because the Riot approach generally is like, even when LEC flames you, they only lightly roast you. It's not really flaming. Like the shots fired segments, like, who's really getting offended by that? Just a fucking light roasting, isn't it? Like, they're not ever really saying you shit. They're just going, oh, didn't he do bad? Oh, he did a bit in the game, right? In general, in League, the approach for the official Riot broadcast is like, don't ever disrespect people, don't ever say people are like straight up bad, sort of like say they had a bad game or they perform. And so basically they make it too sanitized. And I've always said the best thing for people like me and Monty is it necessitates us existing, because you don't even co-opt what people like about what we do, you dumb fucks. Like, because you never ever flame anyone, it means people are thinking, I like what they're doing, but something's not quite it's not quite authentic, is it? So then when someone comes comes along, even if you don't like it, and goes, everyone's shit, you go, but at least it's real. It's real, for fuck's sake. So I think that's also a massive factor, in my opinion, that's skewing, especially like LCS interest, to the core streamers away from the main broadcast. I'll even give you an example, Monty, right? Even content I enjoy. So when I was getting into the NFL, I told you, I watched that like series that Peyton Manning did for ESPN Plus called Detail, right? Where he basically did Kobe's series, but for the American football, right? It's amazing in the sense of like breaking down all the plays. I tell you what sucks ass about it, Monty. And I remember thinking, I'm listening to my favourite player and I'm not vibing with it all, is that he would do what every player does, Monty, which is because every player, even a great player, has been criticised, they think unfairly, and they all think the fans don't know what you're doing. They all have like a conspiracy of silence that they're all going to pretend they're all awesome at the sport, right? So I'd be watching it, Monty, and while on the one hand, I'm enjoying him breaking down, was this a good throw? Should he? At the same time, I'm expected to eat platefuls of him telling me that like Josh Rosen's totally acceptable as like an NFL quarterback. And I'm like going, no. Why do I have to have that as well? Why does that have to come with it? Why is that considered, by the way, professionalism to just soft sell me an absolute line of bullshit? By the way, if people don't know, that guy isn't even an NFL starter now. He's like competing for third string on the fucking 49ers right now. So the point is, the one thing that these core streams will always have, in my opinion, that will make them magnetic is they always have the authenticity. They don't have like a fake veneer added to them. And unfortunately, I believe they could do this. Like, I think LEC tomorrow could integrate some of this on the stream and probably co-opt everyone's like actual interest in watching core streams. But general Riot games, I don't think they want to do this approach, sadly. So I think there'll always be a massive distinction between the two.
Because here's the thing. There's literally nothing preventing them from hiring Double Lift and LS and Bomb. There's nothing. There's literally no barrier.
Yeah.
Oh,
they could do it if they wanted to. So you can just tell they don't want to because it hasn't been done. Period.
Yes, agreed.
It's also like, I mean, to reflect on the whole thing, like it's also been something like that. I honestly think that the organizations themselves like carry a great deal of fault there. Like if we think about it, because quite frankly, over the years, and I think that's maybe also the human element that I've been talking about, is that they have continuously weeded out and phased out like characters that were quite somewhat controversial, but generated views, right? And generated like interest of fans. If we look at it over the years, right? Like, and honestly generated success too, to a certain extent. So like what I've seen in the LEC, and that's, I guess, part of the interview that I also talked about, is like when franchising happened, we actually saw a great deal of shifts within the region, like from teams like basically coming in, obviously potentially making their own narrative, but it's that they at that point hired exterior like talent in terms of like GMs and everything like that in order to hire the people within the scene, which actually like made it so that like the hiring process were really alienated from the actual narratives that were happening and existing at that very moment, right? Like, for example, I was part of that issue, like part of that phasing out people, or part of the phasing out people that was kind of cut because he didn't fit like this objectively or objective view of the outsider. It's like, okay, this guy is like individually fucking good, so we have to get him, right? And or he's cheap, and that's why we get him, right?
Okay.
Like it was a bit more complicated than that. It was a bit more like nuanced than that. And we saw the same thing with Sauce. We saw the same thing with who else was there? Who else was kind of like being phased out? I mean, Gillis to a certain extent now, like that. It feels like a lot of the people within the scene and within the hiring process, at least to begin with, were really harsh on players that didn't fit the archetypes of their individual teams, and it usually was troublemakers or people that could potentially upset the balance within the team and upset the hierarchies within the team, right? And I think that's also been something that has killed off a lot of incentive for players to actually go out there and be controversial. Because if you're controversial, you suddenly become a liability towards organizations, and you're going to be hired by 5 out of 10, 7 out of 10, maybe even 9 out of 10 at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I think you brought this point up in your interview as well, which is like the perception of players is playing into who is hired, right? And why certain veterans aren't hired because they just have like some mild negativity surrounding their attitude or something like that, which is just a ridiculous reason to lose games in a professional sport.
Yeah, and it's also to lose like a lot of knowledge over the years. Like, I mean, a lot of the knowledge that we have now, right, is basically reinventing. It's reinventing stuff that has been in the scene for quite some time, but you just killed off the player, right? Like, for example, let's say Wicked, he had the freezing department in season 2, whatever it is. He already knew about freezing, and then it just disappeared. Like when he kind of like was phased out together with Zoro, and suddenly you have like this this lack of knowledge within the scene because only certain players were able to translate that knowledge into the game, right? And suddenly that concept becomes forgotten over the years. So it's like, and I guess we see this continuously. Like I think more veteran players, and I guess that's the last point that I'm trying to make is that do not denigrate experience, do not denigrate veteran knowledge. It is beyond important. And if you don't understand this, well, then you're fucking bad at hiring. Because if you think that a rookie can always like just do whatever a veteran does, like you're gonna lose out knowledge and you're gonna bleed knowledge all over the years. And at some point, you're gonna end up with stupid players that don't know what the fuck they're doing. And I think that's also another thing. They don't generate views, they don't generate fans, and they don't generate revenue because they're fucking bad or they're fucking.
And also, in my experience, metas tend to come in cycles. And so, when you forgot how to split push, or you have a player who never was in a split push meta, and suddenly there's a split push there, kind of good to have that guy who has done that a few times before, right? So because of the constant change of state within the game, losing that knowledge, even if the player isn't as good at the current meta, having some degree of meta proofing is extremely valuable.
Yeah. The best example of that ever, if we're talking LCS, might be fucking Xmithy. People, I know it was revealed on some talk shows, but anyone in the industry already had heard some of the stories over the years that he's clearly not a guy who was like practicing 24/7, maybe even had splits. He'd be like Impact. He just had splits where he sort of didn't give a fuck, and, he just got it together in the playoffs. But mate, even when it was like the opposite meta to this guy's playing style, he was always effective. He always found a way to play. He always knew, by the way, even when it wasn't his meta of champions, how to still play the game, how to do something useful for his team in an actual pro match. Those are the skills you can legitimately like take to the bank. Those work every year. Whether someone's good this exact month on fucking Lee Sin, like that's neither here nor there. Like I can't bank my whole future on that.
Meanwhile, he's just completely gone missing. Does anybody even know where he is?
Oh, no, where he is now.
He's vanished. It's crazy.
He's vanished. Well, surprisingly, we only have like 2 to 3 teams, even in EU, that kind of know like what you just talked about, right? Like it's both Fnatic and G2. Like surprisingly, like they have kept players around that have had like bad splits, that have had bad months, even, right? Like, but they know that these players know how to win at the highest level, and they trust them. They understand, hey, this is going to work itself out in a couple of weeks. We just have to give it time, because that's been what's been happening over the years.
Yes.
So, but like everyone is trying to reinvent the wheel instead, and is trying to like do something that hasn't been done before. And it screams to me that it's like it's inexperience, but also a lot of like over exaggeration of one's own knowledge, like that you think you know better than people within the scene.
I mean, I'm just gonna be more cynical. It's also because teams are cheap and they just want rookies because they're less expensive.
There's that as well.
Yeah.
Put it this way though, here's the thing, though, Monty. He's definitely correct, because I won't say names right now because I'll just be nice to you for once. Put it this way, there were players in Fnatic who wanted Hylissang out this off season. As in his own teammates, some of them were like, you know what, get this guy the fuck out of my team. And I always just think like
he's having a great split.
I always just want to like turn to those players and go, who the fuck do you think's coming through the door after him, you moron? Like, who did you think they were going to recruit instead? Because the reason I give that example is, look how he's playing now. Like, he's in the best bottle in the whole fucking region. Like, and they would have, and yet that's what players are like when they're in. They do the same thing. It's like everyone in League of Legends can't really remember that in 2 months the game's going to change again. We all pretend like it's the end of the world, that you can't play this champion now. It's like, get him out. It's like, come here. Because the SOAS one's another classic one. It's like, mate, you can almost set your clock by that guy becoming world class again every 2 years. Like, and you don't want to play with this guy. All right, mate, you can just have fucking a Blazed Olive on your team or something, then I guess sound like, have at it, you know.
There's such a lack of focus on playoff success also, that like we dismiss playoff success as a major thing. Like to me, and that has always been my mantra, like maybe because of Reggie's teachings to a certain extent, but also because of my own innate nature, that like I think playoff success is the most important factor. If you don't succeed at winning, like what good are you to a team? And I mean, it's slightly romanticized, because obviously I know that there are different factors, like monetary, like obviously income generation, then obviously like how much a player sells, how much like.
I'll be back in 1 sec. Keep going.
There's so many things, right? Like that. But I think esports, at least, and still, and I think any sport should be about the competition at its core. And if someone can succeed continuously at winning, that should be the ultimate goal for any team. And that's been perverted because people don't care about winning as much anymore, and they just admit, let's maybe we're gonna develop some players and gonna sell them. Like, what kind of strategy is this? This is a defeatist strategy. This is
It's also just egregious. Like, going back to the X-Smithy point, it's like the entire Immortals roster. Like, what happened to Soaz, who was also on that team? Like, Soaz has always been, as you're saying, like a clutch player in the playoffs. He is a literal world finalist. You know what I mean? Like, what more can this guy do? Like, why isn't Soaz on a team right now? It's insane. Why isn't he on Vitality?
Yeah, but why is he not in the scene?
Your mic's muted, Thorin.
Hjarnan and who was it? Hjarnan and Wadid. Like, Hjarnan got legitimately ridiculous. Like, someone goes to, and this would never happen in the East. I'm telling you, this would never happen on an Eastern team. Someone goes to the World Semifinals and is benched the next split and doesn't exist anymore, or is not playing at on a highest level. Like, this would never happen in Korea. This would never happen in China. I can't believe it, because they place so much value on that veterancy. You literally get an elevated status if you're a veteran, and in EU, and like more so than any other region, it gets passed over. It's just gone. So, I mean,
what were you saying about Soaz?
Let's be real, dude. It happened to almost every player. Dude, fucking Mata had like 2 years where he was just AWOL, just wasn't even in the game, and then came back and was in like one of the best teams in the world again. Like,
actual world's MVP, Mata.
Everyone gets to have time off in the game, because it circles back to what we said earlier. If there are like 160 champions in the game, now a bunch of them can be flexed to all different roles. The amount of comps is through the fucking roof. You have all these weird objectives in the game that don't even allow you to just play the game normally anymore. Like, the idea that anyone's just good at 10 things and they're going to be for the next 10 years, they're not. There's no one. That doesn't exist. There's no player. Even pick all your favorites. Dude, go back 1 year, a little bit more than that. If you go back last year to the spring of 2020 and you asked people watch the LPL, they would have all told you the best jungler in the entire world is Kanavi from Jingdong Gaming. Half of the people watching the show right now don't even know who that is. They barely know he played at Worlds. Like, the problem with League as a game is the variables are way too high, and it means that we all, like, to have some like rational sense, we all have to lie to ourselves that it is like a consistent game, but it just isn't. Like, the problem.
Yeah, we have to lie to ourselves. So, but what can we see? What is consistent over the years? And I guess I think that's what we have to address, and that's basically how. To me, I mean, this is my own personal view, and I don't want to have to, like, it doesn't have to be for everyone. Like, how much value does someone bring to a team, or how much does his team improve when someone is there, right? Like, and that's the only thing you can evaluate. Like, how much success does someone bring? Because that stays consistent, because the variables, they change. You may play different champions, but the goal of the game is still, like, to win the game, right? And if that's not, like, what you value and we evaluate, then all the metrics we evaluate players by become randomized amongst individuals that are within the decision-making process, right? They can randomize that whole agenda and just be like, okay, we're going to value laning phase this year. Next year, we're going to value team fighting, just based upon the recency of what happened last year and what was important last year.
Well, it's also, as we've discussed before too, an impossible job to GM, because the game changes at the same time you have to make roster signings. So, like, how the fuck do you know what the meta is going to be? It's crazy.
Yeah,
that's like, people get mad at GMs. It's like, imagine being a GM and you're like, well, time to go sign my roster in October and November of this year. Oh yeah, we have an announcement from Riot about what the game is going to look like next year, but we actually have no information on how it's going to be played or no data. Hope I make the right team, guys.
The thing is, though, that actually does imply, though, like, what we're saying makes way more sense as an approach than what people currently do. Because at the moment, what they really do, Monty, for real, is they go, well, this guy in the French amateur league was incredible on LeBlanc, which isn't going to be played right now, so I'm going to sign to my LEC team and stake my entire future. Like, what? Did you listen to yourself? But the point is, they don't actually say that out loud. They just go, welcome my new star player. Like, you don't know that guy's not, like, fucking any super duper mega player that's played. You don't know he's played one split, but it sounds like he's the new player coming in, doesn't it? So, like, to me, half these teams are just doing the approach of just living by the moment. They're all prisoners in the moment.
And it's almost like sometimes making roster changes deep into a season where the meta has more or less been established, and you know that by summer, Riot's probably not going to fuck with it too much before Worlds, though they have in the past, but they do that less these days. That maybe decisions like Excel and Youngbuck are smart, because you can actually objectively look at a large pool of sample size in the meta and say, hey, maybe these players are better, right?
Agreed.
So let's talk about LEC a little bit.
Sure.
Because I've been loving watching Excel. I think it's been incredibly impressive to see. We had Young Buck on the show last week, so you guys can go hear about some of his thoughts. But what are your thoughts on the XL changes? Because even though they went 0-2 this week, they were actually very exciting games, and I think showed dramatic improvement from the Excel roster.
Yeah, I mean, what I like about them now is that to begin the split with, they obviously hired Nuke Duck, and they kind of had an idea behind it. So the idea was probably, we need more veteran leadership, right? Which I tend to agree with. I don't think that Chocolate added anything to the roster. But then they realized, and I think that's from the outside perspective was pretty clear, that they lacked firepower, right? They lacked people that were individually good enough to actually compete to at least a mid-tier standard or a top-tier standard. I think Dan, God bless his soul, I don't think he's LEC caliber based upon his history and based upon his individual skill that I have observed from the eye test, right? Like, he plays a lot of matchups really weak. He doesn't really go for offensive plays, and he's rather fine with scaling. But when he brought in Nuke Duck, he kind of already had that veteran leadership, that incentive from the mid lane, and that guidance from the mid lane. So he needed someone like Marcoon, who's really individually strong and is going to try to invade, to activate other players and to make them have a game plan in the early game, make them create action. I think that's been something Excel has lacked over the years, despite Young Buck's knowledge about like how teams function. I think he over-evaluated over the years like veteran leadership slightly, and didn't quite understand like that it also takes like certain individual players to actually create these plays.
Yes.
And that's what Marcoon at least brings. I think Advian maybe not as much, but he's still serviceable, which gives them actually an incentive to play the game in the early game, and not just pass out, wait for 15 minutes, and then hope that their Sejani, like whatever comp is going to carry them through the late game.
I think, by the way, you're totally on point there, because I actually do think Young Buck's a very good coach, but I think you've nailed basically his weakness, which is he almost overvalued the role players. Like, for example, if you ever talk to him about, even in Excel, dude, he'll like rave about how Expect played when he first joined and why he brought Mickey in and why they, but it's like, who the fuck are these players, dude? Like, these are like star player roles. Like, you could have solo laners like Expect and fucking Special in LEC in 2020, or you're not going to win. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, in this sense, he overvalued people like Cadril, Dan. Like, these were all right pieces, but like maybe those pieces would work if you had the absolute best players at like solo lanes or something. I think he never had enough firepower in the XL teams, mate. Until now, this one actually looks like he might have the goods. Like this, there's the difference between this XL and the past ones. I don't think there's actually any bad players in this lineup.
This roster's legit.
I'm not a huge fan of Cries, but he's not bad. He's certainly not terrible. I think he could maybe be better in a different team. We'll see. So I think now they actually finally have the pieces. Well, we'll see how good a coach he is.
Yeah, no, I agree. Veteran leadership can go both ways, and like this role player mentality. Like, some role players are sacrificial pawns to a certain extent. Like, you put them in, and you're like, okay, this guy's gonna go 10, 50, or 5 CS, 10 CS down in like 15 minutes, but he's gonna create plays for the team. Like, he's gonna just be someone that is like gonna help the team, like Armored, for example, right? But like Youngbuck, and I think that's maybe the technical analysis that I think about, is that he evaluated players that were playing safely sound too highly. I think that's more like it. That were not risk takers, that weren't like putting themselves in odd situations, because he wanted to have a really stable environment 24/7. I think that's Marcoon breaks that entirely, and I genuinely like watching him. I've seen him in solo queue for so many years, and I always thought he was fine, and now he's finally bringing it to the LEC stage, which I like. I think this is a good hiring. Just flat out.
Oh, by the way, here's one thing for any LCS owner out there thinking, but this is just unfair, Monty. Why do you criticize us for our roster moves and then you don't like... Because here's the difference. Are you ready, LCS owners? You will take out, objectively, one of your best players. You know he's coming back anyway, but you're just living in a dream world that maybe he's gone forever and Jenkins is the new starting top laner that's going to Worlds. You'll bullshit us the whole time that it wasn't what it really was, and then in the end you'll make the move we all know you had to make anyway, or you'll fail. XL looked at their lineup and realized this lineup is never going to playoffs. Fuck Worlds. They made a gamble which has made the team better, and now they actually have an outside chance to go to Worlds. Do you see how the context is night and day between what you're doing and what XL's just done there? Night and day. Because the difference is there's no real downside to this move we're talking about. It's got all this upside, and it was exactly the right time to do it, like you're saying, Monty. The difference with the LCS ones is they're the opposite. It's like the wrong time to do it, the wrong player, the wrong way, and you're going to have to reverse it all anyway.
I mean, there's no downside for XL too, because like, what did they lose? Like, well, they weren't going to go to Worlds with that roster anyway, so you might as well. You can always revert it too. You can always just be like, well, back to EU Masters with you. Yep. You know what I mean? Like, so why not? It's a very low risk.
Yeah, but you know, like this period of like 4 weeks now that they had, it was 4 weeks, and then they decided to make that change, or was it 3 weeks? 3 weeks, and then made that change, right? You had 3 weeks plus the prep time. You had Duke that coming in. You had him actually like getting full-fledged impact into the team, and then you make that call. That's, I mean, as you said it, right? It's really good timing. He let people develop, and then you realize it's not working. It goes very much against like this randomize of like, oh, I'm just gonna exchange this guy and hope that it's gonna work out better. Like, but you need to have a proven amount of time where product has not worked, and then you can make a change.
Yes. I will say I wouldn't necessarily have done some of the drafts, and maybe this is on like Young Buck and the XL coaching staff, like whatever weird Yasuo like Wombo combo comp they were running this last week, which I thought that was a strange choice considering the number of rookies they have, because as soon as you start to buy enough stopwatches and GAs, like it just doesn't work anymore, because the Yasuo, like if you're going to try and get the big, like, oh, Diana comes in, or like the Kallista's going to throw the support in, knock everybody up, and Yasuo's going to come in and ult and just one-shot everybody. You have a very limited amount of time for that to work, and also you're kind of relying on your opponent being dumb. And so if you just
to a certain extent,
yeah. So like, maybe I wouldn't have a high, like people think that that's just like a Bronzodia comp of like press R win game, but it's true in the early game, but it also requires you to have very good decision making about when to push your advantage, because if you don't, by the end of the game, you just can't even execute the combo anymore, and it's just over, like we saw. So, they did a good job in that game, all things considered, but I don't think that was exactly conducive to perhaps some newer players being forced to make plays in a timing window. But
what other teams are there? Is there any other team that is really interesting?
Well, what about to you? What about LEC teams?
Who else stands out to you? Because here's the thing: we haven't talked about any of the top teams yet, Jimison. But the thing is, it's such a diverse group. I wonder who's the one that really stands out to you of the top teams.
I really like G2's improvement, but I think overall Fnatic,
top of the league. Let's do it.
Fnatic, what I really like about them, and I think I talked about this to Tolkien to begin the season with, because I was kind of flaming the support to jungle changes and the top to jungle changes, because to me it seemed a bit disrespectful. But when he actually talked about the reasoning why they did that move, and I just have to address it as much as they did. Like, it's basically that they want to kind of like really just get more smarts into the team. That's basically what it is. Yeah, when they had the Bwipo coming in, like they knew that he was going to be mechanically able to take on the jungle role, but he also had the game smarts and experience over the years of playing at the top level. Yeah, going to Worlds Finals, going to Worlds, what he went afterwards, quarterfinals and quarterfinals. Like, it really obviously shaped his knowledge about the jungle role and shaped his knowledge about like whatever like he has to do, right? So them now having better synergy than beforehand is something that a lot of people didn't expect, because they over-evaluated like how good Selfmade has been functioning. And I think that's where the disparity in terms of like expectation came from. Selfmade, when we looked at last bit, he kind of seemed like out of position, similar to Blaba within C9, like to kind of cross-reference. Is that he didn't quite understand like what his team wanted, and didn't quite play adherent to his team. So he's always on his own, and the team behind him was just relatively passive and didn't quite make as many plays as he did, right? So I felt like there was a complete lack of synergy between the two. But that also happens when you have a lack of communication. And I think that's what has been solved when they brought in Bwipo. Because Bwipo, like, you can say whatever about this guy. Yeah, this guy does not he never shuts up. Like, this guy, he always looks like he just went to Starbucks, had his common order of 100 espressos, with a shot of milk, and he's just there. And
right, and like as a guy who's going to manage the early game, I mean, I think it's no surprise that Niski looks a lot better, because Bwipo is just literally microing him.
Yeah, I mean, and they synergize so well, because Bwipo and Niski have the same approach towards the team, like towards how a team should function, right? Mid jungle is gonna be a facilitator for the map.
Yep.
They're not really doing stuff on the lane necessarily, but they're doing stuff together for other lanes, and that really enables like Adam and especially their bot lane, which to me like right now is the best performing bot lane in
The
the
best for
West
sure.
probably.
Yeah.
Like to actually like be who they are, and I think Upset has lacked that kind of like leader, like that kind of ability from the mid jungle ever since honestly like the Nuke Duck and me days to a certain extent, because none of the other players that or combinations of mid jungle have had that kind of activity level when I think about it. And his laning phase, despite like me being a harsh critic of his clutch performances over the years, his laning phase is insane. He knows what he has to do, and I think that really makes it a good blueprint that they have going for them right now.
My main criticism is, I actually felt so bad for him after the last split. I remember thinking, like, mate, imagine joining Fnatic, right? And it's like you wait your whole, oh, finally, I'm getting the Fnatic offer. There's no one here. What the fuck? And not only that, but now I even lose the soft mid guy. Like one of the only players, on paper I would want like a superstar player. And you make him our top player in a fucking role swap. Like that sounds like a nightmare scenario. It's actually ended up bizarrely. His team's top of the fucking league. So yeah, it's one of those scenarios you can never know how something actually works out in the end. Even the reasoning, because actually I'll allude to something you mentioned there. One of the reasons I heard from actually, I think it was when we had Yamato Cannon on this show. He basically also said one of the logic that they had went like this. Since they really liked the communication between Hylissang and Whippo, anything that allows them to both still play in the game, but Whippo to be closer to him on the map is even better. That even actually, when you look at how they play, it makes perfect sense now. I have to say, like, the problem is, I still do sort of think we can't really know. We have to sort of put a pin in the Whippo jungle thing until next year, in my opinion. Until we've been through a full year cycle of all the meta swaps, I can't just go, yeah, he's definitely going to be he's the new score of Europe. Like, I don't know. I feel like there might be like next year, you might have to just go back to top lane all of a sudden really quickly. We'll see. We'll see how that one.
Also, nobody's mentioning that Adam is still sus as fuck.
No one knows exactly if he's made it yet. Here's the problem. The other one makes sense.
We don't know that Adam's not the imposter. That's all I'm saying.
Here's the thing. It makes perfect sense. The analogy for him is this. No one, by the way, was saying he's like the best top in Europe and he's not. No, but it's because people had such little expectations because they thought, well, he can't be as good as Whippo because Whippo was one of the best. And he's coming into a potentially broken team and he's barely played League of Legends professionally. So I think it's more like the fact he hasn't been terrible has made people almost say he's one of the best. There's definitely a lot of question marks on him still. He's been all right. He's been absolutely fine, of course. But
I wouldn't put all my chips on the Adam table when it comes to playoffs or it comes to an international game. I think he has been improving, but like a lot of the comps that they were trying to run around kind of his top Olaf strengths early in the season were pretty big fails. And so, you don't need a carry top laner on this roster. I think you can play through Upset and Hylissang like just fine. So in some ways, I kind of wish they had a more kind of standard top laner for them, or a more veteran one. Again,
is there a French top laner that you would suggest? Is there someone?
Exactly. But yeah, I think that there are definitely some choices. I understand why you might like roll the dice on Adam, but I maybe wouldn't do that heading into summer and Worlds. I may that's like a project I might have started a little bit earlier on in the year.
Yeah, it seems a bit risky. Like if you think about like how potential, I mean, honestly, when it comes to playoffs, like the games usually slow down. Like that's how it works, because like people are more accustomed to one another, right? So they have more knowledge about like the strategies of the other team. So it becomes a more stale game, and I think that's where Adam is going to face maybe his biggest issues, and I think Bripa is also going to face some of his issues, because what we have not seen from that roster is, I guess, if the game is being slowed down and they cannot rapidly advance the games in certain scenarios, and I think that's where I would say they could potentially face some issues, because that's where I think both Whippo and Hylissang over the years have also struggled when they have had to face rosters or teams that were playing a more, I guess, like macro heavy style and kind of answered a lot of their early advances.
I also just think like straight up in a best of 5 in playoffs, I'm taking Rogue over Fnatic every time at this point, unless I see significant development. I'm taking G2 probably over Fnatic, maybe taking Mad Lions over Fnatic. And so they can be at the top of the league right now in best of 1s, but I am very suspicious of them in a best of 5 setting.
No,
Also, technically, Adam's actually genius because he's also running counter to what we described earlier, which is, yes, obviously all the big core streamers like LS are the dominant narrative. And if they keep saying all the time, amazing, that fucking Renekton's a shit champion, he can be a Renekton one trick his whole career and he'll never be banned away, logically. So that's a fucking thinking man right there. He's almost like seeing into the future there. Well done. Well done, son.
Yep, that's what it is.
But you are a one trick and you will get banned out. So welcome to best of fives.
I mean, besides them, I do like Rogue. I mean, I do like, obviously, I still like Misfits because like the way that they approach the game. But I'm now seeing what G2 has talked about early in the season. Like, I'm now seeing some of it. Like that Nelson's advances or the advances in terms of like understanding like certain fundamentals in a different way has really kind of shown, or at least over the past week. I'm not sure how capable they are at repeating this, but G2, like to me, kind of has shown a bit of a light again of being the team that they want to be.
They're too good. They're too good player for player to be where they were for long. Like, are they going to be the European dominant force that they always were up until this year? Probably not. But objectively, they should still be a top team contending for the title with this roster.
It seems like a last dance kind of situation where I think they know that after this year, and I'm not sure if that's going to be a thing, but it feels like that the roster is not going to stay the same after this year. That's my gut feeling about it. Like I personally don't see Jankos continuing necessarily. Like, I mean, I think he has obviously been the best Western jungler for quite some time now, but I think this past year he has kind of regressed. And I think this may be the year where we're going to see some changes within the G2 lineup.
I mean, we've talked about this before, but how do you keep up the motivation on this team? Like we were talking in a previous show about, maybe Rekkles was not the right player because you're putting another veteran on this roster, but where is there, like, every player in this roster has been in a Worlds final.
They're all mega veterans. Yeah, exactly.
Every player. And they made a roster change and that's still true, right? So it's like, where's the fire? Like, does anybody in their like heart really have the motivation or belief that they're somehow going to top their previous accomplishments?
I mean,
even if you do, the problem is this: the odds that 5 people do, incredibly unlikely. So what you really have to do realistically is you have to do triage if you're G2. You have to look, and you have to be super brutal, by the way, in the off season. You have to literally say, I'm going to have to literally give away players who are like first ballot Hall of Famers right now, but I've got to pick the ones that are legit and build my next team around them. Because the obvious move, by the way, the obvious move is pick which ones you want. So let's say, for example, off the top of my head, you pick like Caps and Rekkles or something, right? Now you need to go and get inspired and fucking Kaiser, and you got to make the new team that's like the super team. Because I do, put it this way, I don't even think there would be a point, Amazing, keeping these same 5 players together. Even if you got it to be competent and good, you're never really even going to reach the limit of what you want, which is like Monty sort of alluded to. The other thing is, if you're these players and you've had those performances, you've been to the World's Finals, you're not playing to maybe make a round of it like Fnatic did the last 2 years.
Exactly.
You're only playing to have a chance to win Worlds, aren't you? Like, that's the whole reason to keep doing it. And you've also all won LEC a billion times. Like, that isn't unfortunately making people get up and do the hill sprints every day. But what people are actually learning, by the way, which is cool, from a team like G2, is how rare truly elite athletes who have the unlimited drive is. I don't think they get it. There are loads of athletes that have all the skills, but they might not actually have that like crazy obsession to every day get up when it's raining. And I don't think people get it. Like, those are like truly rare human beings. I'd even say some of them go too far personally, but you're not going to get 5 League of Legends players like that. Like, it's so unlikely.
Thorin, here's a question for you, if you know off the top of your head. Who has won the fewest European titles on that roster right now?
I mean, logically, it'd be like Mickey X, I'd assume.
Right, but it's still, and how many is that? So like 4?
It'd still be like 4, yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
Like, this is hard to relate to, but if you go through the rigorous seasons every single year and you end up at Worlds and that's where you see all the fans and you have that kind of like reference point, like waking up in the morning for scrims or waking up in the morning for like a normal LEC game that you're playing from home through the COVID times, like it really pales in comparison. It really pales.
Yes.
And that's also something I mean, this has obviously been harder through the COVID times, like because of the restrictions. But I do think that there's a necessity and there's almost like an obligation, I would say, for the teams as well as Riot Games to kind of like work out a plan about like having more events happen. This is not just a team interest, not just a player interest, but it's also a viewership interest and like a fan interest, right? Because if you think about it, like the main connection that a lot of people have from back in the day, season 2, season 3, were those live events. Like I've met so many people that have seen me live, for example, over the years, like that are still cherishing their experience of being at an event, and that's something we've not had besides the World Championships and I guess the MSI for quite some time now. And I do think that it would be the next evolution that is kind of necessary to actually implement esports and make the next step happen, make it bigger than it already is. Like connect more fans with it, bring in outsiders, because I've seen so many people and I've talked to them like that they were like, oh, I actually don't play League, but I went to this event because it was in my city. Like, and that's something that
look, if you want proof of this, look at the Overwatch League. The events that for a much smaller viewership, even they started doing in-person events. There are thousands of people at those events. And I can just tell you from casting at some of those a couple of years ago in like Dallas or Atlanta, people who, didn't play, like you're saying, Amazing, would come to those events because they were gamers and it was in their city and they thought it would be fun. And that generates new fans for sure.
Yeah, worst case, you just get drunk and you just
exactly.
Exactly. Yeah,
you can even tie these two issues together. Like, I actually also think the fact that League of Legends is long leagues instead of like events also kills being a veteran, because it means that instead you just pick the guy who's hot today because it's all about tomorrow's results to get out of the league and to get to the Worlds, etc. If you play in an open circuit game like Counter-Strike, one of the classic things about the super veterans is they're never going to give you 100% performance on day one of like event 10. They don't give a fuck. But by the time it gets to the playoffs, they'll have worked themselves into shape. They'll be ready. Now they'll be fully motivated because now it's the big game. Now it's their chance to win the title. Like once all those things kick into play, even the most veteran player can be at his best. But like, it's really legendary in Counter-Strike that whoever the dominant team is, the next year, they can still win events, but it's like they have to work their way into form. They're not just like going 100% the whole year. Like, I've always thought League of Legends is almost designed to burn you out.
Yeah, and it's also that it's true in sports as well. When you're playing your 65th game of the season in the NBA, or your 105th game in MLB, or your third round robin in LCS right now, you probably don't care a whole lot anymore because you're either locked into playoffs or the motivation's not there, and also it's boring for the viewers. And people are looking at the viewership of esports right now, and like LCS hasn't been doing hot this summer. Now people are saying like, oh, because of all these reasons. Part of the reason is just because the pandemic is like kind of over and people want to fucking go outside instead of watching esports for the first time in a year and a half. Nobody ever talks about that. But also viewership drops in sports generally in the summer. August in baseball is the doldrums where it's like, okay, we kind of know who's good this season. Like, we get it. We're just gonna wait till playoffs right now. I'll be worried if like playoff viewership is shit or Worlds viewership is shit, right? Yeah. I think it's a combination of the format being boring, the players not really wanting to promote it because the players are probably bored themselves, and also the world situation being entirely different, where right now I'm in Lake Tahoe. That's why you're seeing me in a different room, because I don't want to sit at home anymore. You know what I mean? So I'm out too.
No, that's what it's about. Like, I mean, we have this weird conundrum that we have a boring setup of best of ones, but we also have, like, the players also have to care about those best of ones. So it's a really weird conundrum. It's boring to entertain, and it's boring for the players, but it's they still have to care about it because it's quite impactful in terms of like their playoff seeding and whatever it is. You can't quite completely check out and just be like, okay, well, I have 54 games, I have 81 games, for example, like in the NBA, like, or 82, right? And like, oh, I have 82 games. If we get 50 wins, I'm going to be okay. We're going to get like third seed, fourth seed. No, you actually have to care, because you only have 18 games, for example, in the US LEC, right? Like, it's only 18 games. If you only win 8 games, you're probably going to be out of playoffs, right? And it's such a low sample size to actually determine who gets to potentially go to Worlds or to MSI. And it's a weird conundrum, boring setup, yet it's really impactful for what is about to happen, basically.
All right. Well, I think we should wrap up there. Amazing. I'm going to give you the choice. We do viewer questions. There's no pressure.
Yeah.
You can leave, or you can stay for viewer questions. Which would you like to do?
I'm gonna stay.
You're gonna stay. All right, you're gonna stay. All right. So for viewer questions, You can ask them in the Grog Coin 25 channel if you hold Grog coins, which are the insight on esports cryptocurrency. You can go to the Discord server. Type !Discord to join in Twitch chat. We'll have the Discord link below in the YouTube VOD. There's a pinned message on the Grog Coin channel. That'll tell you how to get in there. If you hold 25 Grog coins, you ask the questions. We answer them. Very good. All right. So I saw a stat showing that Rekkles has the most all-time kills in the LEC. In your opinion, does that show how good of a player is or his abject failure to carry his team in key moments when he has all the resources? Well, he does have a lot of titles.
Sounds like a bit of a loaded question there. Like,
or is he just a shitter weighed down with all of the gold?
Well, is that a real question?
I think that's some fan of mine who like hits Rekkles or whatever. He's just trying to make it like slam or whatever. I know exactly.
Anyway, he's obviously a very good player, guys. Like I don't know what to tell you. Like could he do more?
Logically, just from an analytical position, he does play AD carry, so it would be the logical position that if you played the longest, you're one of the best, you're one of the best teams, you should have the most kills. It makes sense. Like if you go and look at LCK, I'm going to guess it's probably like, maybe Def didn't play all the years, but Def would be up there. I'm sure he's like second or third in kills, so it makes sense.
I mean, if anything, it just shows the fact that it took this long for Rekkles to get to 2,000 kills because of best of ones, whereas like these milestones have been passed like long ago on LCK and LPL. I think some of the LCK players are like on 5,000 kills or some shit right now. So that's the embarrassing part to me, not that. Like,
the question was funny though. The question was
is funny. Here's a good one. I'm curious your take on this one. Amazing. Aphromoo turns 30 in September of 2022, meaning he's 28 right now. Will be turning 29 in September of this year, so next month. Do you think he'll still be playing then and become the first over 30 pro in a major region? I don't know if that's true. I'll just assume it is. As time goes on, do you think we'll see more professional players continue to play in their late 20s and beyond, or will the pendulum continue to swing towards younger pros? In Counter-Strike, the answer is players can play over 30, so I assume that will happen. What do you think, Amazing?
I think it's going to happen. I mean, he's on a relatively low expectation team. Doesn't really have to be like a top tier player, and he can kind of be left to his own devices. So why not? Like, he doesn't need to be the best player. He can be an okay player and still stay on the roster. So,
and like you're saying about veterans, he also adds a ton of intangibles. He's always meta when Alistair and Thresh and like. You have to say that a good part of Dignitas' success is probably based around his shot calling and his veteran skills within the game. So he doesn't have to be individually incredible as long as he's able to direct those players towards victories.
Yeah, that's what it is. I agree.
What do you think about?
But here's the thing. Even though temporarily, we even discussed it in this conversation, there has been some shortening of the pro lifespan, but I think that's just ignorance from actually like GMs and coaches. I actually think if you look on a long enough time scale, logically there will be older pros in League because you already actually see it right now. I'll give you a perfect example. Cabashard, who plays currently for the best ERL team, Carmine Corp, a few years ago, if you don't get any LEC offers, you just retire. You just say, right, I'm done. I'm out. Yeah. What he did is the LFL and some of the other ARLs are so legit now, you can just go and have a career there and probably come back to LEC. So in my opinion, you'll even see some of the veterans just go down one level to ERLs, which now the top teams in the ERLs, it's basically better than an LEC team was 3 years ago at this point in time, some of these squads. Like you have a totally pro setup, nice salary, good staff. So I think if anything, there's even like scene reasons that I think we'll get longer pro playing careers, hopefully, and that people don't just get kind of kicked to one curb after one bad year or something, Well,
it's also in like CSGO, you see a lot of the veterans go to new teams. Like somebody's like, oh, I have a bunch of money. I want to make a CS team and this veteran's available. So I'm going to grab them. They continue to make money and they can make a splash by adding new players around them because it's an open circuit that isn't franchised. So I think that longevity. The other factor too is that generally speaking in esports, it's very rare to have players with a lot of longevity that come from a different game. Counter-Strike has been played for a very long time. Dota has been played for a very long time. These scenes have older professional players in them. League of Legends was only really started to be played in 2011. So if you were 18, right, in 2011, it's 2021 right now, you're like Aphromoo, you're 28 years old. So there aren't a lot of professional players who would be 30 who started playing. The earliest you could have played League of Legends was like 2009 in closed beta, right?
Yeah.
So that player would be 30, 31 now.
To be 30, you basically had to be like one of the Koreans who already was like 23 when he started, basically, like logically.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And a lot of Koreans don't continue to play because by this time they have to do their military service, guys.
Yeah.
So there's kind of a finite end to their career unless they go to America and get a green card.
That's actually that must actually, if I think about it, really suck. Your Mada, your score, you're still doing, you're still okay, you're still serviceable, and then you have to go to military service to defend your country and earn your citizenship. Well, all right.
Well, you know, amazing. What's funny about this is that they used to have a workaround to this problem, which is that for Boxer, the Brood War player, they created a team called Air Force Ace, which was sponsored by the Air Force so he could continue playing StarCraft while he did his military service. Oh my God. But I don't know why they got rid of that. That was actually cool.
That is cool. That is cool. Yeah, I'm just glad that Germany doesn't have that kind of like issue anymore. We got rid of it like 2 years before me. So basically, a couple of years before I got into that age group of having to do military service.
It's all right. Nobody wants militarized Germans. Nobody wants that.
Yeah, me neither. Me neither. Trust me.
Some people don't even want to be forced to be part of the EU.
Oh,
we're doing analogies.
Not again.
We're doing analogies.
Let's see here. I am finding both the LEC and LCS broadcast increasingly difficult to want to listen to, especially although the overlays and visual view of the games have issues. I think there were good casters in both regions, but I think the LEC only really has an advantage in the shoulder content, with the live cast being of comparable quality. So the gameplay, basically, the experience in game is what this person's saying. I was trying to explain it to a friend, and it felt like they were trying to cram everything into the live cast, including storylines, analysis, and punditry. Do you think it's true that the live broadcast days are overloaded? And would it improve at all by an increase of talk shows and other content to separate parts of the coverage out? I think actually LEC does a really good job of like being pithy and like jamming a lot of storylines in a very brief and impactful way into a short amount of time, personally.
Yeah. I mean, what they also do well is that they have so many different voices at this point in time. They bring in Trouble Inc. They bring in...
Yeah, it keeps it fresh, for sure.
Just different people, like kind of keeping it fresh.
Oh, the guest people, yeah, like Machine and all. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, like, I mean, at some point we're going to have Thorin on, obviously. That's also going to be a thing.
Think about that, yeah.
More diversity. Finally, a ginger.
Yeah, where have all the gingers been on the fucking LEC broadcast?
Yeah, see, that's Maurice the Lecken. No, but it's so it's generally exciting, like to me at least, to see that kind of broadcast having to be put into place, because like Machine, you may not like it if you're traditionally from LoL Esports, but this guy brings such a different energy and vibe to the to the broadcast that it's like it's literally like it feels like a new TV show that you're watching at that very moment, because you have a different host that is bringing out different questions and bringing out different focal points. So like LEC is doing a good job, but I think SCS also, like, I mean, at this point in time, they're actually doing quite a good job at least being interesting in terms of the content they produce outside of the game and kind of implementing that into the segments that they have between the games.
Yeah, my main issue with LCS, even though I personally love seeing like all the replay file content, and I think it's just amazing as historical, to me, what they're doing is like, remember the things that happened in the past, and like I don't feel that there's enough emphasis on storylines right now that are happening, or like player like personality development right now. It's like, let's talk
my mean joke.
Remember that guy?
Here's my mean joke, Monty, is if you actually look at even the candidates they're picking for these series, it's almost like, what do we actually have in LCS? Bunch of players that were good 5 years ago? There we go. We've even got enough from all multiple European teams and Korean teams. Let's make some content. It's like, God forbid we ever actually talk about any fucking player now at all.
Look, man, I love the fact that they did that SKT Misfits series with all the players, but like, you can't help at the end of that be like, that was a really good piece of content. Man, these guys are washed. Like,
yeah, exactly. Why they all in LA? Exactly. The fucking Europeans as well. What?
It's like, that was really cool to hear about that Fire series in 2017, but oh shit. things are going so well now. Anyway, so yeah, I love that content. So like, I don't want to shit on them too much, but I feel like they could do more about the current narratives and setting them up in a good way. But yeah, I don't know. I think both the broadcasts are pretty good now overall.
I've probably seen, because I've been doing it anyway with my sponsor, but one of the things it was an idea we actually had in CSGO with Flashpoint, the company me and Monty were working with. One of the things I always wanted to do was have these long broadcast days, have talk shows that are basically just podcasts that like build into it, but it's kind of like low investment. Like you don't have to watch the podcast every day, but if you do, instead of just watching and it's like second ones, like, and here we are in the ultimate, like, no, it's like it builds up to say, right, here's the matches we're going to talk about today, and what do you think about this drama going on in the community? And the idea is you'd slowly ramp up into it, and then the live show would begin. Like I do think you can definitely marry the types of content together. They don't have to be strict shoulder content. Especially because, in line with what this guy's saying, if he's someone who does find it be too overloaded, this would give sort of like some downtime at some point, or like a little bit of a breather,
Here's a really confusing thing that I don't understand why LCS or LEC doesn't do. So you make the dive in Euphoria. Why don't you put that on the stream an hour before the stream starts on the first day of every week as kind of a lead-in of all the narratives from the previous week?
Seems obvious to me. I know.
You made the content. You just turned the stream on an hour earlier. It costs you $0. I don't understand.
Maybe the days are slightly too long though. Like I think the third day of every week is actually quite entertaining in the LCS when you have like these 3 games or 4 games only. But I think having a 6-game day feels too long, not because like the content in between is not vast enough, but it's actually that there are too many games. I think that may be an issue that people face, and then at some point just turn off because they cannot be arsed anymore.
I don't know.
But
well, who knows? What are some of your favorite memes / pastas you've seen over the years in esports?
Oh, going to be some good ones here. Right, do you have any good ones, by the way, Amazing? Well, like we're just thinking up like classic copy pastas or silly memes from League. What are some ones that spring to mind for you?
I mean, I think I've caused a couple, so maybe. I mean, some of the LS related memes that I have put out, I guess they were pretty good. I can't quite recall them. Maybe someone in chat can do that. But I think over. I mean, white people happy is fucking funny.
That's a pretty funny one.
I like to the classic shout out of move your mothers for MYM. That was pretty fucking funny.
See, chat knows. No, it is. It is. Move Your Mothers was pretty good. I mean, I think Big Sorry and Move Your Mothers is one of my favorite. Yeah.
Big Sorry. Yeah, that's right.
Big Sorry. I didn't want to threaten your mother. Big sorry. It won't happen again. It's okay. Oh, that whole MYM thing, like, oh my god. But what other teams have had that kind of like?
One of my favorites of all time has to be when Jens Hilger, one of the co-founders of G2, did that loan with Fnatic, and then Riot was like, "It's all right, we made them reverse the loan," and I was like, "Is this even real life? Like, am I on a TV show right now? What are you talking about?" That was a classic when they said the reverse loan. There's one. That's a good one. I was up there. By the way, he goes around saying Reginald, his entire career is basically a meme. There's unlimited memes from in there. Just think of any of his tweets the last few years. Oh, by the way, Mark Merrill, same group. So, love me some Reggie. There's one.
Love me some Reggie. So I love that.
Him saying "love me some Reggie" was essentially him capitulating and then having to give ownership of the league to people in his scene, because that's how bad he is at social media. Then there's the one he had with Dom, where he basically said to Dom something like, like, "You're welcome for like being able to have a career from the game I made," or something. Like basically this guy has probably the worst PR I've ever seen of anyone. Like everything he says in public is like, why are you even saying this out loud at all?
That's like the president of America being like, "Well, Mark Merrill, we gave you the freedom to have a company, so thank me, bitch."
I know. Like the fuck? I know. It's because everything about it, dude. It's the way he also had done that thing where it's like, dude, don't you guys love optics? The optics on this is that you are some mad robber baron cunt, just like, listen, peasant. Be grateful. You exist at my leisure. Like, what the hell? Why are you saying that to him publicly? Like, there's all fans watching and everything. Mark Merrill, what are you doing? It's so wild.
A crown on his head, and he's just like, yeah,
like some bad guy from a movie or something. It's mad, isn't it?
He's fucking modern day Marie Antoinette. He's like, yeah, I let them eat cake. He's like, oh, okay. Oh my god.
I know.
Let's see here. Do you think you can have a non-dragon focused meta and have a soft limit on game time? As in, like, basically because
You can't just drag it out forever,
yeah, before I could just drag out until the end of time,
Probably
which did
not,
make
I'm
this
guessing,
boring
right?
games.
Because here's the thing, the reason why I also would say probably not is because from watching Dota 2, that's one of the reasons why in Dota 2
Yes.
games at times can last forever, because you can just do rat Dota, which is basically just split pushing forever if you're very clever about how you do it. So I think probably you just can't do it. I think you probably
Or you'd have to make
it.
like a Baron buff like so OP or something like that. That I don't know, guys. I'm not a game designer. I'm actually super bad at this kind of shit. What do
Very
you
hard
think?
to do that shit, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, make national P, but that's the only solution. But no, it doesn't work. Like I think the dragons right now are because they're the only objective that happens early in the game that kind of has some kind of late game I guess impact. So he need to have dragons in the game to actually have honestly a consistent game plan. But again, I'm also not a game designer, and I've flamed every single game design so far. So I think at some point I will just be reductive and just have 5v5 all the time. So
By the way, just before I forget, I should reference one meme, which I can't not allow to be mentioned in the current group of people on the show. One of my favorite memes of all time, because I'm gonna finally pick it. Here's my favorite Reginald meme of all time. It is when he did the tweet where he said that everyone in the industry, no one would deny that Monty was actually just a coach only for the cameras.
Oh yeah,
and that he was because just the whole way it was framed, it's almost like he was intentionally making it a meme, which no one can deny. Or what the fuck, the way phrasing of it was so weird as well. I know.
Everybody knows it. No one can deny it.
There you go.
Funny.
Then the fact that, dude, I replied to him 5 minutes later, go check this tweet. And I'm just yeah, but he is a coach. I've seen him coach. And he just immediately goes to, all right, he's just a bad coach. I'm like, what the fuck? 1 second ago, you just said no one could deny it. Like, what?
I mean, to be fair, that whole time was extremely fun from my perspective.
Oh, it's hilarious.
You guys kept kept talking about TSM, obviously. So that's something inside versus our narrative kind of clashed 24/7. We actually, as players, we really hated your guts. You don't even know, how much we hated you. And at some point we win, and even I start shit talking on Twitter, whatever it is, and then we see you in Korea. And I don't know if you remember, but you actually walked past us because we're in the same building, right? And literally none of us looked one another in the eyes, and we just walked past one another, and that was it. That was the only interaction I've had before season 5 with you.
What's funny is we had Dyrus on the show later, and he admitted to having never watched any of the segments, yes. And he went back and he was like, actually, it was pretty funny. I don't know why we were so mad.
Oh, it's mad, isn't it? I know, it's so mad. Because you have to realize this is not a joke. Once Styrus was retired, right, all of his fans were trying to spur him on. You should get them back. You can say anything now. So he went back amazing, and he just watched a few old Summon Insights, and he even just said afterwards, I'm not actually that mad. Actually, it's fine. Really, what? He's been holding this in his heart for years. Those bastards, it's all their fault. Everything that happened to me, we didn't even do any of that. What are you talking about?
It was also awkward as fuck because I've always been friends with Dyrus's dad, so I'm chill with his dad, and he's mad at me and shit. It was really funny.
Oh man.
What's the next question then?
All right. I don't know the context of this, so I'll see if you guys do. What is more pathetic, the CLG PR team for releasing that video, or Nelson trying to sneak into Hotline League while keeping his name on Discord as Nelson? I don't know what this Hotline League reference is.
There was an episode of Hotline League, which apparently only morons, idiots on Reddit, and shit players from Oceanic region thinks good. Shout out. Basically, on this show, Nelson did just come on, and they said, and it's Nelson next, and you could hear from his fucking voice, which is a guy from Singapore. So it's he was trying to make it he was just a viewer, and he was going to ask an edgy question. But you could, the whole thing just gave it away instantly, didn't it? And because of what Travis and Mark Zia they're obviously terrible actors, so they were sort of going, oh, and I wonder who this could be on. Oh, who is this? This Nelson guy. No, give me a break. You're just overselling it right now, aren't you? Give me a fucking sell it, mate. You have to pretend it's real. So anyway, that's just and so one of those questions is just a joke, basically.
Well, I should. That was my mistake for Hotline League, is never actually trying to pose as somebody else and see if I can get on the show and ambush them. But I prefer not to use my time in that way. I prefer not to use my time.
I did the same thing, Monty. I didn't pose as anyone different. My problem was just being myself meant the show wasn't allowed to exist anymore, according to Travis, so it had to be deleted for all eternity. Exactly. Luckily, though, here's what people don't know. Do you want to know the most gangster detail that no one knows, Monty? I'm going to reveal it now. The only reason anyone even knows that episode of Whose League Is It exists is because of that highlight made by the guy called Network Kitten, right? Here's what they don't know. The second that show finished, I didn't know Travis was going to delete it, but I messaged that guy and said, you better make like a highlight video, because he used to make these like highlight clips at the time. Said, you better make one out of this episode because it's fire. And luckily he made that before Travis deleted the VOD. So that's the only reason we even had the evidence it exists now. But thank God I actually had the sort of, something within me told me, Travis won't allow this to exist for a long time. So luckily I extricated it from him. We evacuated the bbest shit.
I mean, just imagine a world where Travis would be allowed to be God. That's all I'm going to say. Clearly, the franchising system is showing why it sucks. 2018 to present summer split. CLG is 8th, 3rd, 9th, 9th. Golden Guardians is 10th, 7th, 5th, 10th. Similar in LEC as SK, and it is not clear to the fans of the leagues how the relegation will happen, or if they have a bad 2 years, because they said if you have a bad 2 years, they could have forced changes. Okay, guys. The reason why the franchising system is failing, I mean, there are a lot of reasons, but here's a hot tip. It's just a business, guys. It's just a business. If the business end of the league or esports was going well, teams would put more money in and probably put more effort in, right? So the problem here is that the business of League of Legends is clearly not up to the standards that, shockingly, who owns CLG and Golden Guardians? That's right, professional sports teams. Now, I don't think the Golden State Warriors and the Knicks are full of people who are dumb at business, right? Just a thought.
I mean, we'll leave the joke about the Knicks aside, but yeah,
leave the joke about the Knicks aside. Look, Jim Dolan is his own force of nature, but like the Knicks are objectively a very successful business. They have a huge fan base. Even though they suck competitively, they're not a bad business. They make a lot of money. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
So if those are the teams that you are currently not investing very heavily into their roster, and CLG arguably has been investing at least somewhat, not like some other teams, then maybe the problem is with the business model of the franchising.
Yeah.
Not franchising itself. Maybe it's.
Do you have a suggestion as to how you could change it to make them want to be more competitive, Monty?
Well, again, I think the fundamental issue is that when you have developer-run esports, there is a conflict of interest between marketing the game and creating an entertainment product. OGN was very good at creating entertainment products because they couldn't make money from the games themselves. So I think that developer-run esports will always have that conflict of interest, and I think that over the long term, you can't create good fan bases and narratives if you're trying to sell people skins at the same time. Or you're putting KDA in there. Like, when you use your opportunities at the League of Legends World Championship to show KDA K-pop dance concerts instead of tell the narratives of the teams and players, I think that's a problem.
I can subscribe to that. Yeah, that makes sense. No, I mean, I don't know why people were so on board with like Riot actually hosting the broadcast too. Like, I think they should have really had the incentive to actually sell those rights to someone else.
Who knows what happens in the future? Like, I will say, at the time when Riot created LCS and NA and EU LCS, they were spending money to market the game, and they could do it better because no one could operate an esport at the level of production they were giving at that time. It was impossible in the West. So they do deserve credit for leveling up the ecosystem. But at this point in time, I do not think they are necessary to operate the events any longer. That's my opinion. So I think there are other problems with franchising as well. Clearly, the lack of relegation. And also the problem is in franchising, there are drafts in sports to help the bad teams get better. There is no draft in League of Legends. So there's no way to improve these rosters, and there's no mechanism to create parity in the league. There's no salary cap because there's no draft, and all of these things need a players' union to happen. So if you guys want to see the franchise teams getting better and maybe more parity, you should want a players' union.
By the way, I will just say, even though the guy identified correctly that technically there was a rule, I believe the rule was, I think you had to be bottom 2, 3 out of 4 splits or something. It was something quite tenuous like that. But if you're wondering why they would make it so vague and why they never would say how it would be activated, it's because they don't want to actually activate that ever.
No, they don't.
Like, I always tell people this, the only customer Riot currently actually has for LCS is whoever the fuck bought a Riot spot. Like whoever bought that slot spends way more than any sponsor does. So at the moment, the last person they want to kick out is the guy who paid him $10 million 2 years ago. Like they want to find every way possible to keep that person because they presumably wanted to partner with that individual in business. If they didn't want to partner with you like H2K, they didn't include you in the LEC. They just left you to one side. So the problem is, like Monty says, if the people we're talking about, here's the thing. If we were talking about Europe, you could maybe have a discussion about SK because they don't really look like an org that's got massive amount of VC. They don't look like they want to spend a lot. They look like they're sort of min-maxing. The difference is, as Monty says, the teams you talk about in America, they're backed by like real sports teams. That is exactly who Riot wants. I know this might sound mad to you guys, but if Riot had a choice tomorrow, who do I go forwards with? I have only two choices. I can go forwards with Cloud9, a totally endemic org, who right now is just surviving off how good they are at business today, or fucking Madison Square Garden's company. They'd pick the fucking Madison Square Garden company for tomorrow, because they're thinking 50 years in the future, not how cool was Cloud9 being for 5 years.
And also,
like,
if you kick CLG out of the league, then you disincentivize other sports teams from investing because they're like,
hurts. Yeah. The model looks shit. Yeah, exactly. No, so basically the problem is this. Don't get your hopes up they're going to kick any of these teams out. If they do, then spoiler, it was not because of the placing. It's because Riot wanted that specific company gone. Like, here's the real joke. Maybe there is a world where an SK could get kicked one day, but that'll only be, by the way, if they have like some straight fire European sports team once in the league, you know, and like, oh, we'd love to buy a spot and there isn't one. They'll find a way to kick someone then, in my opinion. But I don't think they'll do it for bad performance, unfortunately. I know it's mad because to you or I, we're like fans of esports. It is terrible to have a team come 10th place a bunch of times. I don't think it's as big a deal to Riot though. I don't think they actually are sort of like life and death about like fans are.
No, they don't. I mean, why would they care? Like they already got Riot already got the money. Like at this point, it doesn't really
exactly.
like unless it's a PR disaster where some team is suddenly openly anti-LGBTQ, whatever it is. Like they're not gonna ban anyone or kick anyone. Like that's just not gonna happen. But yeah, like I think the players' union is actually something really, really important. I actually, it's so underrepresented, and that incentive towards creating one is so underrepresented. I don't know why. Like
because they don't want a salary cap. Amazing. Because if you can make $2 million on an uncapped, a salary, because the league is an uncapped salary, and you could make that today, why the fuck would you care about creating a salary cap that hurts you now in the hope that the league lasts longer because there's actually more stability or parity or excitement?
I mean, obviously there are selfish reasons that could apply, but I don't think that a players' union necessarily has to be connected towards, like, I mean, the salary cap can be negotiated pretty far upwards. It doesn't need to be like low, so it doesn't have to like hit a certain number. But I think the whole drafting system has to be expanded. But I also think that the incentive. I mean, obviously creating parity is important. But I do think that the players like being benched and continuously being swapped out, like on a moment's notice, is partially because of that lack of governing or like counterbody to the managements or the owners of the league, right? Like if you don't have anyone that is going to speak up for you, obviously everyone is going to be left out to dry, right? Like everyone is on their own. That's kind of what we've seen both in the EU and in A, that I think none of the players actually wants to care for one another. And they rather just look at their own team or themselves within that moment. And I think that's it's a disservice towards future players and honestly, like how the league started to a certain extent. Because I think despite what people like know about the early days, I felt like that the teams and players really had a lot of impact about what Riot, which direction Riot was going, right? Play testing, then personal input, like about the leaks and everything like that, right? Like there was an incentive to actually contact Riot and have that talk. But nowadays, that's just really like on the owners themselves and no one else.
All right, here's a meme question. Which one is a harder pass? Seeing Jatt's head coach application on your desk or the angel of death when it sees lamb's blood on a Hebrew doorway? That's so loaded. Look, I don't think Jatt's like a terrible head coach. I just don't know if he was the right choice for that team. Like trying to be Jatt and coach Alfari, Jensen, and Core JJ simultaneously, I think is really hard. I think it's really difficult for anybody to coach that team. So I think in the right environment, Jatt could do just fine as a head coach. And
all those gigs are poison, what you call poison chalice. And everyone who's coming from talent is going to find this. Because the real problem is this. Would Jatt get that coaching job tomorrow if he'd never worked in a different area in esports? Of course he wouldn't. If he even wanted to become a coach, he would start at a smaller team and he would work his way up. And if he ever got hired by Team Liquid, it would be years down the line after he'd been in CLG or been in some academy team or been in some different region.
It's almost like Spawn, who is the Team Liquid Academy coach right now, who came from casting, right? He didn't start out, despite being a very knowledgeable analyst. Like, I know Spawn, he's a friend of mine. He started out as the academy coach for Team Liquid. He didn't start out as the head coach of an LCS team.
Well, basically, this is going to happen to everyone who does this, because the problem is this. The individual wouldn't go to coaching if they had to work their way up, right? Because they've already got a parlay from some other big field, and they're saying, look, I'm not just going to leave this gig for no reason. So if I leave this gig, you better give me an awesome, different gig with all different, like, enticing. But the problem is, I don't think a lot of them realize they don't know what they're wishing for. Because what they're really saying is, I think I'd like to be a coach. Well, let's test it out by just giving you a job where you can't think, you have to already be the best coach. Now, that's a ridiculous scenario to put yourself in. But as I say, unfortunately, I know why people are doing it. It's because nobody wants to believe it's a new field you have to learn in. The same thing happened, by the way, Miz. I'm not just giving it about Jatt here. The same thing happened to a whole bunch of my friends in Counter-Strike. Like, one of them was the best colour commentator, Henry G. He became the general manager of Cloud9 CSGO. One of them was the best... another one of the best commentators in Moses. He became the coach of Team Liquid in CSGO. And both gigs ended the same way, mate, which is like they were all right, but they weren't as good as they thought they would be. And they picked way too hard a job to come into as the first job. So I agree. If Jatt goes, the problem is, if he wants to be good, he has to really do it as if this is his job for the next 5 years. If he does that, there are plenty of other teams I think he'll get a chance on. But if he wants to do it like this and be the best from tomorrow, you aren't the best right now, mate. I've heard the fucking... things, let's just say that things.
Well, it's also that I think both Moses and Jatt came into super like teams with a ton of like really, really veteran players and like major / worlds winners. And I think that's a really difficult scenario to come into as any coach.
That's also what they wanted though, dude, because remember, the naivety was this. Of course you want the best team in your first job. You want to win. So the sad thing is they all thought this is awesome for me. They didn't realize it's actually the hardest gig you can pick, basically. It's like literally just going into a job you've never done before and having to be the best in the world tomorrow. Like it's just so, it doesn't matter how good your skills are. It's just so unlikely you're going to do it, isn't it?
I mean, it's also dependent on your personality type, right? Like, for example, Jatt was brought in when he was brought in, like to actually be a leadership type figure, right? That is actually like really managing every single player, managing the expectations, whatever it is. And then you suddenly have more difficult personalities and you're still supposed to be an authoritarian figure with that environment. Like, obviously, you're going to be set up to fail. And I do think that in lower tier teams, like, he could easily coach Golden Guardians. I mean, he could easily coach
exactly.
Rekkles, like, no problem whatsoever. But he needs to be put in that position where he's going to be fine and he can actually utilize his skills properly and not like have to face too much adversity from the people in the team.
Yeah, I agree. So I don't think it's a hard pass on Jatt as a coach. I think that's a really hard job, and I think he could do a good job in a different circumstance.
Right? Anyway, what was the other thing that instead of?
Oh, the angel of death when it sees lamb's blood on a Hebrew doorway. Passes that one right by. So that one is the one I pick.
Klaus will take on, yeah.
NA Kerfuffle, I don't understand your hypothetical, so I'm going to need you. We'll answer it next week if you retype this in a way that I can comprehend it. And so we'll end with this one. If you press the button, Valve starts to regularly update CSGO. Would you press it? It's an interesting question for Thorin. So if
say the first part again, yeah.
If there's a button that you could press that would cause Valve to regularly update CSGO, would you press it?
No way. I would never press it in my entire life. I would guard that button. I would kill anyone who attempted to press it ever. Because I don't care how fucked any meta ever is. There is always, in my opinion, more you can do within any meta than letting the game developer decide how the game's going to be played. Like, I've never seen a single game developer that had a very good time. Like, they sometimes lock into it. By the way, I even think it's ostensibly impossible to actually balance a game. It's almost like a ridiculous premise. Because what are you balancing for? How are you balancing? In this case, there's a million variables in League. So I prefer it generally if you just keep the game the same and then let the players figure it out.
If everything is even... where's the incentive to play it? Or everything is like good, where's the incentive to play it, right? There's no figuring out process anymore.
And also, if you look at the history of esports, guys, the esports with the longest periods of play, which are Brood War and Counter-Strike. Counter-Strike has been using most of the same maps forever at this point in time, and Brood War didn't have a patch for the last 20 years, 23 years?
About 20 years. I think it's about
20 years.
Yeah,
20 years. Brood War has not had a patch. And you know what they did is because the developers are going to make balanced decisions for the casual experience, because esports is 1% of their player base, esports fans who watch the game. So what is better, and what happened in Brood War, is you allowed the companies that made esports, so OGN, MBC Game, these television companies in Korea, would hire people to make maps. They literally had full-time jobs for people to make maps, and they balanced the game around esports only. And so Counter-Strike could do the same thing in theory, but although part of the charm of Counter-Strike is actually having the same maps, I don't know. What do you think? How would you balance it as for the esports scene, Thorin?
I mean, I already actually suggested literally the Brood War approach about 10 years ago, which is what your Valve should do, is just basically get a bunch of the best map makers and just have them sort of on like a retainer and say, it's not that you have to come up with a map. You come up with all maps constantly. And then the idea is we take a couple of them, we bring them in. In the Counter-Strike, we've actually already talked these things to death on talk shows. Like the idea a lot of people agreed with, I thought was a pretty good one, is because in Counter-Strike, for example, we have 2 majors a year. So it's like having Worlds twice. What you would do is you'd make those into seasons. And the idea is the Worlds, the major, would be at the end of each season. So at the beginning of the season, you bring in the new maps, you take out a couple of maps, you say, right, at the end of a season, we will cycle new ones in, and you know for that season, these are the maps being played. You play them through, and then everyone knows at the end, right, there's no point playing that map because it's going out. And it would be very logical. Basically, it would be like a hybrid between like the way the game gets changed in League, but we'd be using maps to change it here, and the way it currently is a stagnant thing. So I think that's the best of both worlds from what I've seen in esports.
The thing about Brood War and Counter-Strike is if I played Brood War Counter-Strike 10 years ago, I can still watch a game today and understand what's going on and be a fan that doesn't play the game anymore. If you tried to watch a League of Legends game from 10 years ago, or like you didn't play League of Legends the last 10 years, there's zero chance you would have any fucking clue what is going on today, guys. Zero chance.
Well, that explains a lot about myself. Interesting. That makes sense.
No, I'm saying if you took a gap, right? Like, my point is like, but like, if you took CS:GO, you could still watch a Dust 2 map and you'd be like, oh, I remember Dust 2 from when I played this 10 years ago. I can enjoy watching this game. It's a good viewership experience. And if anything, for esports longevity, you need to create esports experiences like that for people, because eventually people have lives, they have families, they move on, but they still might watch the sport, just like they played football in high school, but they're not playing football anymore, but they're still going to watch the sport because it's still comprehensible. That is not true of League of Legends. It's not true of MOBAs. MOBAs are very big offenders, and the reason why they continue to have huge viewership is because they have huge player bases, not because they're retaining people over time.
Yeah. True.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you for joining us for those questions. Amazing. Really appreciate you being on the show today. It's been wonderful chatting with you again. Any shout outs for yourself? You're making content for Misfits right now.
Yeah, I'm making content for Misfits, so come check that out. And, if you want to watch me into a couple of games, you get to see my stream too once in a while. So it is what it is.
And is it just Amazing X? Is that actually the stream?
That is actually the stream, yep. Wow, getting such a opportunity to shout out. Holy moly. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. That'll do it for this week. We'll be back for next week of Summoning Insight. We'll see you then.